You find yourself walking slowly through the damp quiet of the medieval fenlands, a place where the land itself seemed never fully committed to being solid ground. These were wetlands shaped across centuries by tides, storms, and the patient work of people who lived at the edge of arable land. You can almost imagine your feet sinking into the soft earth, the reeds brushing against your legs, the smell of standing water rising around you. The fenlands were never dramatic in the way mountains or fortresses were. Instead, they were a place of quiet unease, an unsettled boundary between safety and uncertainty. Yet it was here, in this subdued landscape, that some of the strangest sightings of the medieval world occurred. People of the fenlands recorded lights that appeared in the darkness. They were described as drifting, glowing shapes that rose from the ground or hovered above the surface of the marsh. Some said they flickered like torches carried by distant travelers, though there were rarely travelers at that hour. Others claimed the lights floated as gently as lanterns, except they swayed in ways no human hand could guide. These lights were seen often enough to be spoken of with calm familiarity, and yet not so common that people ignored them entirely. They lived in the space between everyday life and quiet fear. To understand why these lights held such significance, you must imagine the world before artificial brightness. After sunset, the night belonged fully to the land. Firelight came from hearths. Hearths were within houses, and step beyond the threshold meant stepping into a world where sight was limited to whatever pale moon or scattered stars allowed. The fenlands deepened this darkness. They swallowed sound, muffled footsteps, and left a traveler uncertain if the soft glow ahead was a real guide or the beginning of danger. Medieval people did not rush to magical explanations in the way many assume. They were often cautious, grounded in patterns of daily labor, but they lived close to the land, and they paid attention to signs, smells, and phenomena that modern observers often overlook. When a strange light appeared above the water, it was not only a curiosity, it might indicate shifting peat beneath the surface, the presence of dangerous gases, the nearness of a safe crossing, or even the track of a lost traveler. For families whose lives depended on careful judgment of the land, these lights were not merely wonders, they were part of an unspoken system of natural cues that shaped survival. Travelers' accounts show that the lights did not behave consistently. On certain nights they seemed to hold still in the distance, glowing gently like a resting ember. On other nights they darted through the marsh in abrupt movements, as if following an unseen path. A shepherd might glance up from tending his flock and see a spark drifting between reeds. A fisherman returning before dawn might glimpse a pale shimmer rising over the water. A child peering out from a cottage window might notice a dim flame that flickered at a place where no one should be walking. There are recorded stories of villagers attempting to follow the lights. It was not an act of bravery nor foolishness, but simple curiosity shaped by necessity. If the land shifted and new safe paths appeared, people needed to know. Sometimes the lights led to soft ground that gave way underfoot. Other times they guided travelers toward firmer earth, where new islands of stability had formed. Over time, certain families began to map these sightings, not in writing but in memory, matching each appearance to patterns of wind and weather. Perhaps without knowing it, they created one of the earliest forms of environmental observation. The record was informal, carried orally, shaped by experience, and passed quietly across generations. Yet the lights remained unexplained. Medieval chroniclers described them with restraint. They were not embellished with monstrous details, nor wrapped into dramatic legends. Instead, they were noted simply as wandering flames or restless glimmers. This restraint itself is revealing. It shows how ordinary people in quieter regions often confronted the unknown with patient observation, rather than immediate storytelling. The fenlands taught them to reserve judgment. Still, there was unease. For every calm shepherd or practical fisherman, there were those who believed the lights signaled the presence of spirits or restless souls. These interpretations did not dominate daily life, but they existed alongside the practical ones. When a family lost a traveler who disappeared into the marsh, it was not difficult to imagine that a future glowing light marked the place where the lost one wandered. Some believed the lights lured people away from safe paths. Others thought they were warnings meant to keep travelers from entering treacherous terrain. The dual nature of the lights made them difficult to categorize, neither entirely helpful nor harmful. People began to treat the fenland lights with small rituals. A woman might whisper a quiet prayer when she saw one, not out of fear, but as a gesture of respect for the land that shaped her life. A man walking home late might pause and touch a small charm he carried, hoping to maintain his safe route. The gestures were subtle, woven into everyday behavior, nothing theatrical, nothing meant to impress others. Instead, they were steady habits that reflected how the medieval world balanced practical experience with quiet superstition. Though these lights remain mysterious, there are natural explanations that align with what we now understand about the environment. Gases rising from decaying organic matter can ignite under certain conditions. Tall grasses can reflect stray moonlight in ways that create the illusion of movement. Moist air interacting with natural sources of light can distort shapes and brightness. But even as you consider these explanations, it is important to remember that medieval observers did not have the luxury of scientific language or laboratory tests. They had only their senses, their experience, and the traditions of their community. What is striking is how consistently these sightings were described across generations. If the lights had been exaggerated, you would expect variations. Instead, the accounts remain remarkably steady. They describe soft glows, drifting movements, and brief appearances. Whether the observers lived in scattered cottages or small villages, the sightings had the same quiet quality. Even more striking is that the descriptions from this period align with accounts from later centuries, well into the early modern era. This continuity suggests that the lights were not inventions but genuine phenomena rooted in the landscape. The people who lived in the fenlands developed a form of patient acceptance. They did not demand complete understanding of the lights. Instead, they learned to live with them, to observe them, and to include them in their understanding of the land. Such acceptance is rare in modern life, where most mysterious things are pressed for precise explanations. Yet the medieval Fenlanders found balance in uncertainty. They walked their paths, tended their flocks, fished their waters, and simply noted the lights as part of the world. As you imagine yourself standing in that quiet marshland, perhaps near the end of a long day, you can almost picture what those people saw: a pale glow rising from the reeds, wavering gently, never fully bright nor entirely dark. You might feel a moment of curiosity, perhaps a slight unease, but also a sense of calm acceptance. The fenlands were full of small wonders, most of them subtle, none of them seeking attention. The wandering lights were simply one more reminder that the world held mysteries that could be observed without being fully understood. And yet, despite this calm acceptance, one question lingered in the minds of many who lived there. If these wandering lights appeared so regularly, so quietly, and in so many places, what exactly were they showing people, and why did they seem to come and go, without any consistent pattern at all? The fenlands stretched across a wide expanse of low and shifting earth, and the people who lived there understood that the land could not be controlled, only respected. If you imagine walking through these marshy reaches during the colder months, you would feel the ground give softly beneath every step. Pools of water lay scattered in unpredictable shapes, reeds bent in the slightest breeze, and the sky above cast long reflections across the shallow flats. This environment shaped not only the work and habits of its inhabitants, but also the way they observed the wandering lights that appeared without warning. In the villages bordering these marshes, homes were built upon small rises of firmer ground. The structures were simple, made from timber, clay, and woven reeds. The smoke from their hearths drifted low and long across the fen, often creating illusions of its own. Yet even within these familiar distortions, the wandering lights remained unmistakable. They were never mistaken for the warm flicker of a distant home fire. Their glow was softer, cooler, and lacked the rhythmic dance of flame. People described them as steady but restless, like something trying to move without quite knowing where to go. In this section you move deeper into the daily lives of those who observed these lights most often. Among them were reed cutters, fishermen, hunters, and women who gathered herbs at the edges of the marsh. These were people who spent long hours exposed to the rhythms of the fenlands, and whose survival depended heavily on reading the environment with care. They learned to judge wind patterns, water levels, the behavior of birds, and the subtle colors that appeared in the early evening sky. The wandering lights became one more element in this tapestry of signs. One of the most detailed accounts of these lights came from a monk who spent several seasons traveling between remote settlements to collect tithes and deliver written messages between abbeys. His chronicle still survives, though the copy we know is likely far removed from the original. He described a night when he traveled with two companions across a narrow track that cut through the marsh. The path was safe, but only if one followed its shape exactly. To deviate was to risk sinking into soft ground that could swallow a person entirely. The monk wrote that, as they reached the midpoint of the crossing, a pale glow appeared near the edge of their vision. The glow rose slowly, as though emerging from the earth itself. Then, without any obvious shift, it drifted sideways over the surface of the water. The companions stopped walking, not out of fear, but because the light moved directly toward their path. As it approached, they saw that it had no shape, no core, and no edges. It was simply a cluster of faint brightness, like mist that happened to shine. One companion believed it was a sign that the marsh was unstable ahead. The monk, cautious by nature, waited to see whether the glow would continue moving. The third companion, younger and less accustomed to travel, argued softly that it might be a spirit. Yet the monk dismissed that idea without severity. He recorded only that he found no reason to assume anything beyond natural explanation. Still, he admitted he was uncertain. After several moments, the glow drifted away from the path, moving toward an area the monk knew to be unsafe. It hovered there for some time, then sank downward and vanished. The three men continued their journey in silence, each forming his own interpretation of the event. The monk's record helps modern readers understand the mindset of medieval people who lived near these lights. They were observant, patient, and willing to pay attention to small details. At the same time, they were restrained in their judgments. They did not leap immediately to the supernatural, nor did they ignore the possibility that something unseen might influence their world. Instead, they held multiple possibilities in their minds, evaluating them slowly as circumstances changed. This balanced approach extended into practical routines. Fishermen, for example, learned to use the appearance of wandering lights as subtle clues about weather or water conditions. One account describes a man who noticed that the lights appeared more often after several days of still air. He concluded that gases trapped beneath the surface might escape more easily when pressure shifted. While he did not use words of science, his observations aligned with natural phenomena that modern scholars understand well. Others noted that the lights often emerged near the edges of channels where slow water movement could churn up organic matter. Even without formal training, these individuals developed a reliable sense of pattern recognition. At the same time, the lights influenced local beliefs about the spirits of travelers who had vanished in the marsh. Although many villagers maintained a practical view, the memory of lost individuals carried emotional weight. When someone disappeared, the community mourned not through loud rituals but through quiet acts. They left small bundles of reeds at the edge of the water. They spoke the name of the lost traveler at morning gatherings. They watched for lights near familiar crossings, viewing the glow as a reminder of those who had not returned. Such associations did not create dramatic legends. Instead, they existed as part of the texture of communal memory. The wandering lights also played a role in shaping how families passed down knowledge of the land. Because written records were rare in rural areas, information about safe paths and changing ground conditions had to be transmitted through spoken instruction. Parents taught their children to observe the subtle cues that marked stable earth. They explained how the reeds bent differently when wind passed across deeper pools. They described the smell of soil that had become saturated beyond safety. And in some cases they spoke of the wandering lights, advising their children never to follow them deliberately, but also never to ignore their presence. To the medieval mind, knowledge of the environment was a form of survival. The fenlands were not hostile by nature, but they demanded attention. The lights were neither fully explained nor entirely mysterious. They were simply part of this landscape, like shifting mists or sudden bursts of bird flight. Children grew up hearing stories not as warnings, but as guidance. A young boy accompanying his father to check fishing traps might be told to note how a faint glow often rose near certain channels after rainfall. A girl helping her mother gather herbs might be told that a small shimmer in the distance meant they should return home before the ground grew unsafe. These teachings carried no fear, only respect. Small diagrams drawn in the margins of a surviving manuscript suggest that some observers even attempted to sketch the movements of the lights. These diagrams, though rough, show arcs and lines traced across marshy ground. They lack precise scale, but they reveal an early attempt to track phenomena through repeated observation. Such efforts were not widespread, yet they show that curiosity existed alongside caution. People wanted to understand the world, even if only in their own modest way. Another source comes from a traveling merchant who visited fenland villages on his route between inland markets and coastal towns. He wrote in a letter that he once stayed with a family who lived near a particularly marshy stretch, known for its unpredictable terrain. During his stay, he witnessed a light rise from a shallow pool at dusk. The family members barely reacted, simply acknowledging it with a quiet nod. When he asked about it, the head of the household explained that such lights had appeared in the same place since his childhood. Over time, he had learned that the glow often preceded the formation of a new patch of soft ground. The merchant found the explanation reasonable enough, though he admitted it left him with more questions than answers. The presence of the lights occasionally influenced the routines of monks who tended small chapels in isolated areas. These men often traveled at dawn and dusk, when the marsh was especially still. They wrote of learning to distinguish between the wandering lights and the reflections of their own lanterns. One monk described how he once approached what he believed was another traveler, only to discover that the glow ahead of him faded as he drew near. The realization startled him, though not enough to disturb his composure. Instead, he made note of the experience as one more reminder that the fenlands were a place of subtle illusions. Despite the many accounts, there remained no unified explanation for the wandering lights. Some villagers held firmly to practical interpretations, viewing them as signs of changing ground conditions or natural emissions from the marsh. Others believed that the lights carried deeper meaning, perhaps indicating the presence of spirits or the boundary between the living and the dead. These beliefs did not cause conflict. Instead, they coexisted quietly, each person free to hold their own conclusions. In winter, the lights seemed to appear less often, perhaps because colder temperatures reduced the release of gases from decaying vegetation. During the warmer seasons, sightings grew more frequent. Livestock often reacted before people did. Animals stopped grazing and lifted their heads when a light drifted close, their instincts sharper than human attention. Villagers learned to watch the reactions of animals as closely as they watched the lights themselves. What is most striking about these accounts is the calmness with which medieval people treated the phenomenon. They did not gather to tell dramatic tales around the hearth. They did not attempt to chase the lights or devise tests to prove their nature. Instead, they folded the sightings into the steady rhythms of their days. The lights became reminders of the land's quiet unpredictability, signals of how little could be fully known or controlled. As you return in your mind to the fenland paths, you might imagine the distant glow of one such wandering light, drifting without urgency across the marsh. You might feel the cool air, and hear the faint rustle of reeds. You might sense the patient acceptance that shaped the lives of those who lived here long ago. And yet, even with all that careful observation and lived experience, a question hovered quietly at the edge of their understanding. If the lights appeared not only at moments of environmental change, but also during calm, uneventful nights, what were they responding to, and why did their movements seem to mirror the subtle shifts of human presence as much as the changes of the marsh itself? When you picture the fenlands in their quiet expanse, imagine the pale outlines of dawn spreading across low water. The land holds a muted stillness at this hour, as though the world has not yet decided whether to wake. It was within this tender calm that many medieval observers learned to make peace with the wandering lights. They had grown used to the idea that the lights might never offer complete explanations. Instead, they accepted them as they accepted shifting banks of fog or the sudden calls of unseen birds. Yet some individuals remained quietly troubled by one lingering truth. The lights did not merely appear at random. They seemed to follow patterns too subtle to describe, yet too persistent to dismiss. Section 3 brings this story toward its resolution, not by dispelling the mystery, but by showing how people learned to interpret the lights through long patience and careful observation. The medieval world was filled with uncertainties, and people often balanced those uncertainties with a mixture of practical reasoning and restrained imagination. To understand how the wandering lights shaped daily life, you must step further into that world of measured curiosity. A few surviving chronicles describe how certain families living near the marsh developed a long tradition of watching the lights for guidance. These families were known for their familiarity with the land, and for their steady habits. They taught their children to listen as much as to look, for the fenlands offered clues through sound as well as sight. The soft sucking of water beneath reed beds might signal that the earth was weakening. The hum of insects rising earlier than expected might suggest changes in temperature. The lights were only one element among many, but they were the most visually striking and therefore the most memorable. One especially striking account comes from a woman who kept a small herb garden at the edge of the fen. She described watching the lights for years as she tended her plants, learning to recognize the conditions that made them appear. In her recollection, the lights often rose shortly after dusk when the air was still. At other times they drifted across the marsh on nights when the tide had shifted farther inland than usual. She noted these details not in any attempt to solve the mystery, but simply to understand how the land moved through its rhythms. Her observations proved useful to others. When she noticed the lights appearing near a particular marshy bend, she advised her neighbors to avoid the area for several days. The ground there, she said, had begun to release strange smells and subtle vapors, which she associated with the drifting glow. Her neighbors listened. In the days that followed, heavy rain caused that same bend to collapse into a deep pool of water. The woman's warning likely spared several families from losing livestock. Her practical sense, combined with her familiarity with the lights, allowed her to read the land more accurately than most. These quiet successes led some villagers to regard the lights as signals from the land itself. They believed that the marsh was speaking in ways that required careful interpretation. Such beliefs were not dramatic. They did not involve elaborate ceremonies or supernatural claims. The idea was simply that the land possessed its own quiet language, and that attentive people could learn to read it. The wandering lights were one of its most noticeable expressions. In a wider sense, the fenlands served as a kind of unspoken teacher. They forced those who lived there to confront uncertainty without panic, and to accept that full knowledge was neither always possible nor always necessary. When a person spends long years watching tides rise and fall, listening to wind move across tall grasses, and tracking the seasonal shifts that guide the work of sowing and harvesting, they develop a calm patience that shapes every part of their life. This patience became the defining trait of fenland communities, and the wandering lights became a symbol of that patience. Still, there were some who wished for clearer understanding. Among them were several monks who kept records of their travels through the marsh. One monk in particular, an older man who had spent many seasons walking the same narrow paths, attempted to gather testimonies from villagers. He recorded their spoken descriptions with care, noting the times of year when the lights appeared, the direction in which they drifted, and the reactions of wildlife. His notes reveal a methodical mind, one that sought order within apparent unpredictability. Yet even he acknowledged in his final entry that he had reached no firm conclusions. His work illustrated the limitations of the human attempt to categorize every natural phenomenon. Another worthy perspective comes from a farmer who lived near the marsh's outer edge. He planted barley on the driest patches of land, relying on the rare stretches of firm soil. He observed that when the wandering lights clustered in certain locations, the ground nearby often changed in texture within weeks. It might grow softer or drier. The lights, he believed, were not causes of these changes, but indicators. To him, they acted like the early signs of shifts that inevitably shaped the land. His idea was not rooted in mysticism, but in simple experience. When you work the same land every day for many years, you notice small details that others overlook. His observations also influenced the placement of new footpaths. If a series of lights appeared repeatedly in one area, villagers sometimes altered their routes to avoid that part of the marsh. Over time, these small adjustments shaped the network of paths that connected settlements. It is possible that some of the modern tracks across the region still reflect these medieval choices. In this way, the wandering lights not only influenced daily decisions, but also quietly shaped the geography of human movement. There were, of course, individuals who approached the lights with a more cautious mind. Travelers passing through the fenlands at dusk sometimes mistook the lights for distant torches. They altered their direction, believing they were being guided toward a cottage or hamlet. Only when they neared the glow did they realize that no person was present. These moments caused discomfort, yet travelers often described them without fear. The experience felt strange, but not threatening. The lights drifted away as easily as they had appeared. Some believed the lights responded to human presence. They spoke of moments when a glow seemed to pause as though watching, then move slowly aside to allow passage. Whether such perceptions came from human imagination or from the natural movement of the light itself is not easy to determine. Yet such accounts remind you how closely medieval people observed every detail of their environment. Without modern distractions, they were attuned to the land in ways that modern observers rarely achieve. As centuries passed, the wandering lights continued to appear, but their meanings shifted as cultural beliefs evolved. Later generations interpreted them differently, sometimes aligning them with spiritual ideas, other times linking them to natural explanations as scientific understanding progressed. Yet even as these interpretive frameworks changed, the core phenomenon remained the same, a soft glow rising from uncertain ground, moving gently through the marsh, present for only a brief moment before fading into darkness. Looking back, scholars now view the wandering lights as a blend of natural processes and human perception. Gases rising from organic decay can ignite under the right conditions. Moisture in the air can refract faint light from distant sources. Insects can reflect moonlight in ways that produce brief glimmers. These explanations offer clarity, yet they do not capture the full experience of those who lived beside the phenomenon. For them, the lights were part of a world shaped by patience, caution, and small observations that guided the course of daily life. What is most compelling is the sense of acceptance that permeated Fenland communities. They did not rush to define the lights. They did not insist on explanations. Instead, they allowed the lights to occupy a space between known and unknown. This approach reflected a larger truth about medieval life. People understood that the world contained mysteries far beyond their control. Instead of fearing these mysteries, they often responded with quiet observation and thoughtful adaptation. Imagine standing on a raised patch of ground at the end of a long day, watching the sky deepen into a blue that borders on darkness. The marsh lies spread out before you, still and reflective. Then, at the edge of your vision, a faint glow rises from the earth. It hovers above the water, drifting slowly. You watch it with curiosity, not expecting answers, only acknowledging that it exists. In that moment, you share something with the people who lived centuries before. Their world may be gone, but their capacity for quiet wonder remains familiar. In the end, the wandering lights shaped the experience of life in the Fenlands, not through dramatic events, but through subtle influence. They guided careful decision-making, encouraged patience, and reminded people of the quiet unpredictability that governed the natural world. They served as silent markers of the land's shifting moods and as symbols of the medieval acceptance of uncertainty. As you reflect on their presence, a final thought emerges. If such small and quiet phenomena could shape the daily habits, beliefs, and decisions of entire communities, what other unnoticed wonders might have shaped medieval life in ways that left little trace, yet influenced history in ways we cannot easily measure? The chroniclers of the late medieval world left behind many puzzling notes about wonders in the heavens, but few accounts carry the same trembling awe as the tale of the night when the sky above the Rhineland seemed to split apart. What the villagers witnessed lingered in their memories for decades, spoken in hushed tones beside hearth fires, passed down by elders who still remembered how their knees shook as they looked upward. The event took place during a cold autumn season, when the moon hung thin and dim over the river valleys. Life had settled into its usual rhythm. Farmers gathered the last of the year's grain, millers ground flour late into the evening, and children pressed their faces against the windows of timber houses, listening to the wind pass through the thatched rooftops. Nothing suggested that the heavens themselves were about to perform a spectacle unlike anything these communities had ever known. The first signs began shortly after dusk. A shepherd boy named Lucas, tending a flock near the riverbank, noticed a faint glow rising behind the hills. At first he assumed it was the light of a distant village fire, or perhaps travelers making camp. But the glow grew brighter and brighter until the hills themselves seemed outlined by shimmering lines of pale gold. Lucas stared with his mouth open, unable to decide whether he should run or stay and watch. Moments later the glow changed color. Instead of warm gold, it shifted into a deep crimson like embers stirred beneath a blackened log. It pulsed slowly at first, then more quickly, as if some giant unseen heart was beating far beyond the world's edge. Lucas dropped his staff. Several of his sheep bleated nervously, bunching together as though trying to disappear into the earth. Back in the village, others began to notice the strange illumination. A baker, closing his shutters, paused mid-motion when he saw a red flicker sweep across the sky. A group of women drawing water from the well glanced upward. Sure they were seeing the reflection of some great fire. One of them whispered a prayer, another insisted they must warn the priest. Yet the villagers hesitated. Fires happened. Storms could cast strange reflections upon clouds, but this light moved with no rhythm they recognized. It crept across the sky like a living thing. The transformation came all at once. A loud crack echoed from above, similar to a great tree trunk splitting in winter frost. Dogs began barking wildly. The villagers looked up and gasped as a long, jagged line of white light tore across the heavens from east to west, as though some force had raked a claw through the night. The line glowed fiercely, brighter than the moon, and from it flowed curtains of color that undulated like phantom banners. No one in the village had ever seen the northern lights. Their world had no tales explaining shimmering curtains of red, green, and violet dancing overhead. They knew only fire, storm, and celestial omens. So to them, this spectacle was not a natural glow of charged particles, but a literal rending of the sky. The priest, Father Arnulf, ran outside, clutching a lantern and a wooden cross. He stumbled into the square, raising his trembling voice and urging the villagers to gather and pray. The ground glowed faintly beneath their feet as the lights shifted and rippled above them. Children clung to their parents. Several older villagers fell to their knees and wept openly, convinced the day of judgment had arrived. The jagged tear widened. From within, it streamed currents of green light that twisted like ghostly serpents. For a brief moment the colors coiled around one another, in what looked like spiraling towers, shimmering columns, stretching from the earth to the broken sky. Some swore they saw figures moving within the lights, warriors clad in armor, angels descending, souls ascending. Of course, nothing physical stood within the sky, but fear can cast its own shapes upon the imagination. Hours passed, though to those watching it felt like an entire lifetime crushed into a single night. The lights never repeated the same pattern twice. At times they seemed to drip from the tier like molten metal. At other moments they fluttered like fabric in a storm, a glow the color of pale green wheat washed over the rooftops, followed by streaks of violet that painted the river with a soft gleam. Lucas, the shepherd boy, who had first seen the glow, finally ran back to the village with his sheep trailing behind him. Breathless, he tried to explain what he had seen, but the adults hardly listened. Their attention remained fixed upward, as though the sky itself might speak if they stared long enough. Father Arnulf led the villagers in prayer after prayer, shifting from psalms of mercy to confessions of collective guilt. Several people murmured about past sins, old rivalries, and unfinished apologies. A few chickens escaped their coop and wandered nervously in the square, seemingly as frightened as the people. Despite the terror, no harm came to the village. The air remained still, the ground did not tremble. The river flowed as it always had, but no one slept through the event. No one dared turn away from the sky long enough to close their eyes. Gradually, just before dawn, the jagged tear faded. The colors thinned into faint threads, then into mist, and finally into nothing at all. The sky returned to its ordinary darkness, as though nothing unusual had taken place. A strange stillness settled over the village. People looked at one another in silence. Mothers picked up their children. Farmers brushed dirt from their knees. Even the priest let his arms fall limp at his sides, his lantern still flickering weakly in one hand. When the first light of morning eased over the hills, the villagers gathered in the church, not because Father Arnulf commanded them, but because they longed to make sense of the terror and wonder they had experienced. The priest declared the event a divine warning, calling the congregation to examine the state of their souls. Others believed it was a sign of political upheaval, perhaps an omen foretelling war or famine. A handful whispered that it might reveal something far older, something the church could not explain. But one truth remained unshaken. From that night forward, their world felt larger, more mysterious, more perilous. They had always imagined heaven positioned above them in calm and perfect order, but now they had seen it twist and shimmer like a living veil. They no longer believed the sky was a simple dome placed overhead by divine hands. It had layers, depth, movements unseen and forces unknown. The villagers did not realize they had witnessed a powerful display of northern lights driven unusually far south by rare patterns in the Earth's magnetic field. They had no knowledge of solar winds or geomagnetic storms. They had only their fear, their imagination, and the belief that the heavens might speak to them directly if the world grew wicked enough. In the decades that followed, elders recounted the tale to younger generations. Each retelling grew more dramatic and frightening. Some said the tear had stretched from one edge of the earth to the other, others claimed the colors dripped like blood. A few insisted an angel had appeared briefly within the light, though no such detail existed in the earliest accounts. Yet, even in its most exaggerated form, the story held a quiet truth. That night changed the village, not through fire or destruction, but through awe, and awe, in the medieval mind, was a powerful force. It shaped belief. It stirred repentance. It tightened the threads of community. It reminded every listener that the world was full of marvels they could neither predict nor control. And as long as the story survived, so too did the memory of the night when the sky itself seemed to break open and reveal the strange wonders hidden behind its familiar veil. The tale of the torn heavens spread far beyond the Rhineland village where it had been witnessed. Word traveled slowly in those days, carried by wandering merchants, peddlers, minstrels, and monks who copied unusual events into travel notes and monastic ledgers. But once the story began to move, it gathered layers of detail and urgency the way a rolling snowball gathers weight. Within a handful of seasons, the event had become known across several regions as the Night of the Wounded Sky. Some communities called it the Burning Curtain, others, especially those who favored prophetic interpretations, spoke of it as the first shimmering sign. Because no one had a shared understanding of what exactly had happened, the tale reshaped itself to match every listener's fears, hopes, and beliefs. Yet among all those who heard the account, one group reacted differently than most. Instead of shrinking in fear or brushing it aside as rumor, they felt a strange calling. These were the traveling pilgrims who had long roamed the countryside visiting shrines, relics, and holy wells in search of healing or salvation. They were accustomed to hardship, accustomed to signs, accustomed to reading meaning into the smallest shifting shadow, and for them this story carried the weight of a summons. The group began as only two individuals, both seasoned wanderers who had met many years earlier on the road to a distant abbey. Their names were Matthias and Helvidius, and they had spent most of their adult lives walking from one sacred place to another. Their journeys were not the type funded by nobles or guided by clergy. They walked on foot, slept wherever they could, and survived on bread given to beggars or roots gathered from the forest floor. Matthias was the older of the two, with a thin face weathered by decades of wind and sun. His eyes were bright with a quiet hunger for understanding. Helvidius was younger, but carried himself with the slow, careful movements of a man who had seen too much suffering and believed too deeply in patterns woven into the world. They encountered the tale of the wounded sky in a traveler's hostel during a stormy evening. A group of merchants shared what they had heard from a cooper, who had heard it from a salt trader, who claimed to have passed through the Rhineland shortly after the event. The merchants told the story with great flourish, turning the villagers' terror into spectacle. A sky split by a line of light, strange figures hovering in the glow, colors dripping like blood into the river. Matthias listened without blinking. Helvidius held perfectly still, gripping the cup in his hand until his knuckles whitened. After the merchants finished their telling and laughter filled the room, Matthias leaned toward his companion. "This is a summons," he whispered. Helvidius nodded. "We must go." In the morning they began walking toward the region where the event had occurred. Their progress was slow, as it was for all travelers of the age. Roads twisted unpredictably. Weather shifted without mercy. Bandits prowled the outer paths. But the two men walked with a kind of gravity, as though drawn by an unseen rope, tugging steadily at their shoulders. Along the way they encountered others who had heard of the Night of the Wounded Sky. Some dismissed it as exaggeration. Others believed it to be a warning from heaven. Yet with each conversation, Matthias and Helvidius felt more certain they were moving towards something profound. They did not think they would witness the phenomenon again, but they hoped to speak with those who had seen it and understand how deeply it had shaken them. The pair's solemn manner soon attracted attention. In one village, after they spoke quietly with a miller about the tale, two young brothers decided to join them. They were not yet 30, and had grown restless after a failed harvest and the death of their father. They claimed they sought meaning, a clearer sense of why misfortune had visited their family. A sign in the heavens seemed as good a place as any to begin that search. A few days later, a widow named Albruna asked to join as well. She had lived beside a pilgrimage road for many years, offering shelter to wanderers. But the tale of a sky torn open had shaken her more deeply than she cared to admit. She believed she had committed some unnamed sin long ago, and that this sign might hold the key to releasing its weight. The others welcomed her without question. After that, more individuals aligned themselves with the growing group: a smith's apprentice, a cloth dyer, a boy who claimed to have dreamed of green lights swirling above him, a former soldier who had grown too weary of steel and blood. By the time the pilgrims reached the foothills leading toward the Rhine, they numbered nearly a dozen, not formally bound, not led by any official authority, but united by a shared need to understand the unexplainable. As they walked through forests and crossed quiet meadows, the pilgrims often discussed what they imagined the event might mean. Their conversations were never loud or heated. Instead, they spoke in tones of wonder, fear, and longing. Matthias believed the torn sky was a reminder that heaven was not as distant as people often assumed. He claimed that something must have brushed against the world, something powerful enough to leave a shimmering wound behind. Helvidius felt differently. To him the phenomenon was a cry of warning. He believed it revealed that human behavior had drifted too far from virtue, and that the glow in the sky was a wordless admonition from realms unseen. The young brothers saw it as a symbol of transformation. They believed it meant their misfortunes were part of a larger pattern, and that the world was on the edge of some great change. Albruna said little. She often walked slightly apart from the others, clutching a small carved cross at her chest. Her silence spoke of a deeper fear, as though she believed that approaching the village would force her to confront something long buried beneath the folds of her memory. Not all spoke with hope. The former soldier worried aloud that such a sign foretold conflict. He had seen empires unravel after stranger things. Lights in the sky rarely meant peace. Yet however their interpretations differed, none doubted that the event mattered. As the pilgrims neared the region of the Rhineland village, they noticed signs of tension in the surrounding countryside. Villagers who heard their questions reacted with mixed fear and suspicion. Some warned them not to ask about the wounded sky. Others crossed themselves, or muttered quick prayers. A few refused to speak entirely, shutting their doors or turning away. One elderly woman finally explained the reason for this unease. For months after the event, bands of zealots had arrived in the region seeking meaning in the lights. Some demanded confessions from villagers, others accused them of witchcraft or secret sin. A handful had even attempted to erect a shrine in the valley, claiming the tear in the sky marked a sacred threshold. These visitors had caused disruption, and in one or two cases, violence. Matthias bowed his head respectfully. "We intend no trouble," he told the woman. "Only understanding." The woman studied the group closely, then nodded. "Then walk gently. The people here have lived through enough fear." The pilgrims continued onward, now moving with quieter steps, more aware of the fragile emotions left behind by the celestial phenomenon. They finally reached the village in mid-afternoon. It appeared ordinary at first glance, a cluster of timber houses and narrow paths winding around a central square. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Chickens wandered lazily near the well. No visible sign remained of the night, when the sky had blazed with unnatural light. Yet the villagers carried an unspoken heaviness in their expressions. Their eyes flickered sharply whenever anyone looked upward. Conversations paused whenever the pilgrims approached, as though people feared the group might ask the question they did not want to answer. Matthias approached a farmer repairing a fence. The man hesitated, tightening his grip on his tool, but he did not turn away when the pilgrim spoke. "We have traveled far to hear your account," Matthias said softly. "We seek only truth, nothing more." The farmer's shoulders slumped. He gestured toward the square. "Speak with Father Arnulf," he said. "He saw more than most." The pilgrims exchanged glances. Helvidius thanked the farmer, and the group walked toward the church, their steps hushed by the dust beneath their feet. The door of the church stood slightly open. A lantern flickered inside, and somewhere within, the priest who had witnessed the wounded sky waited, carrying memories that still shaped the village's silence. The church at the center of the village was modest in design, marked by age rather than grandeur. Its wooden beams carried the scent of centuries of incense and damp winters. The pilgrims stepped inside one by one, allowing their eyes to adjust to the dim interior. Shadows clung to the corners, softening the edges of the pews and making the lantern near the altar appear brighter than it truly was. A figure knelt near the front, his form bowed low as though in mid-prayer. When he rose and turned toward them, the pilgrims saw a man older than they expected. Father Arnulf's beard had gone pale, and his eyes held the weariness of someone who had spent too many nights awake. Yet there was a steady kindness in his expression, the kind that lingers in a person who has carried more than his share of burdens, and still chooses gentleness. "You have come for the sky," he said without greeting, as if he had expected their arrival. Matthias stepped forward. "We have walked far to hear your account. We do not seek to disturb your people." Father Arnulf nodded, motioning for them to sit on the first few pews. He remained standing, as though unsure whether he would have the strength to rise again if he sat. "The villagers fear speaking of that night," he began, "not because the event itself harmed them, but because it harmed their sense of understanding. People rely on the world being predictable. When it is not, the mind becomes restless." His gaze drifted upward to the ceiling beams. "Even I have trouble naming what we saw." The pilgrims waited in silence, each sensing that pressing him would only cloud the clarity he was struggling to find. Matthias folded his hands. Helvidius leaned forward slightly. Olbruna clutched the cross at her chest. The priest continued. "It began with sound," Father Arnulf said. "Not a loud one. A hum, like a faint trembling in the air. You know the sound of a pot beginning to boil, when the water has not yet burst into steam, but you can feel movement underneath. It was like that, but in the sky." He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling. "I stepped outside. The villagers had gathered already, pointing upward. At first I thought it was simply the moon striking the clouds strangely, But then the clouds themselves began to thin, as if pulled apart from within, and through that small opening came a line of light, straight as a blade. It grew wider over several breaths, bright enough to dim the moon but not enough to blind us. "What I remember most," he said softly, "is the color. It shifted constantly. Green melting into blue, blue melting into something like silver. I had never seen anything like it. None of us had." A quiet rustle moved through the pilgrims, but no one spoke. Father Arnulf went on. Some villagers fell to their knees, others ran into their homes. A few held their children tightly, but most simply stared, unable to look away. Then the shapes appeared. Matthias said gently. The travelers who told of this spoke of forms. Father Arnulf nodded slowly. They were not clear shapes, only suggestions of movement, wisps of shadow against the glow. They drifted within the light, bending and thinning as if made of smoke. I did not believe them to be beings, at least not in the way we think of beings. They seemed more like reflections of motion, echoes of some distant change. Helvidius leaned forward. "Did anyone speak? Did anyone hear anything other than the hum?" "No speech," the priest replied. But the hum grew louder, and then it deepened. It turned into something like a low note from an instrument too large for human hands to play. "And then?" Matthias asked. "And then," Father Arnulf whispered. "It closed. The wound drew inward, like the pulling of a seam. The colors swirled faster, the hum rose sharply, and in an instant the light contracted into a single small point. It pulsed once, twice, and vanished." He exhaled long and slow. A few moments later, the world looked like it always had. Helvidius bowed his head, and the villagers were changed. "Some," the priest said. "Others refused to speak of it, as if silence would make it less real. A few believed we had seen a sign of divine displeasure. Others saw it as divine wonder, and some," he paused, "some saw it as an omen of danger." His eyes drifted toward the window. "We lost 3 families the next morning. They packed what they could and left before dawn. They believed staying here meant living too close to a place heaven had touched." "What do you believe?" Matthias asked. Father Arnulf hesitated. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but low. "I believe it was something neither heavenly nor earthly, something between, a force, perhaps, or a natural event beyond our understanding. I have prayed for clarity, but clarity has not arrived." He spread his hands. "That is all I can offer, and I fear you will find no more certainty among the people here. Their memories are clouded by the fear that comes from having no explanation." The pilgrims thanked him and stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The village was quiet, as though everyone was watching from behind shuttered windows. The group gathered near the well, unsure what to say at first. Matthias was the one who finally broke the silence. "We have heard what we came to hear." Helvidius nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "But we have not understood what we hoped to understand." Obruna looked toward the hills beyond the village. "Perhaps understanding is not the purpose of the journey." The soldier among them crossed his arms. "If a threat is coming, understanding is necessary." "But no threat has followed," said the dyer. "No disease, no storm, no war." "That we know of," the soldier murmured, eyes narrowing. Matthias looked up toward the sky, now perfectly ordinary, a gentle pale blue fading softly into dusk. "Perhaps the meaning lies not in the event, but in our reaction to it. The sky opens, and people flee, or they fall to their knees, or they seek answers. Maybe the light simply revealed who we already were." Helvidius considered this. "And what does this reveal about us?" "That we walk toward mystery," Matthias said, "even when we know we may find nothing." The boy who had joined them weeks earlier tugged at Matthias' Sipst's sleeve. "Do we go home now?" Matthias looked at the group. Some faces were tired. Some still glowed with curiosity. Others carried more questions than when the journey had begun. "We do not need to continue," he said quietly. But the sky tore open once. If it is truly possible for the heavens to shift like cloth, then there are forces in this world we do not yet understand. And if such forces exist, perhaps this was not the only sign. Perhaps others have seen strange things elsewhere. Helvidius met his companion Sept's gaze. "Then our pilgrimage is not at an end." The young brothers exchanged glances. The dyer nodded. The former soldier sighed but did not protest. And Albruna, clutching her cross, whispered, "I will follow." Matisse turned toward the road leading out of the village. The sun was beginning its descent, stretching shadows long across the path. "We set our feet forward once more," he said softly, "and we listened for the next ripple in the world." As the group walked away from the village, the sky shifted toward evening. Pale gold touched the horizon. A cool breeze rustled through the grass. The pilgrims walked in a loose formation, not because they needed order, but because their shared uncertainty held them together. And as the first stars appeared overhead, each member of the group wondered the same quiet question, though none dared speak it aloud. If the sky could tear open once, what else lay waiting above them, just beyond the reach of human knowing? The history of medieval Europe is filled with great battles, crumbling empires, saints, heretics, and kings. Yet hidden deep within its fabric are quiet episodes, so ordinary and so unremarkable on the surface, that they nearly slipped into the dark between recorded centuries. Among these forgotten chapters lies the tale of a mill that turned when no wind stirred and no water flowed. It is a story born not of grand miracles or sensational prophecies, but of the long, slow routines that shaped daily medieval survival. It began in a small settlement tucked beside the edge of a wide marshland, where life moved at a pace so steady that travelers often forgot the place the moment they left it. Fields stretched out in neat rows, mud clung stubbornly to boots, and at the center of it all stood a simple wooden mill that had fed the village for generations. You might expect a place like this to reveal little worth remembering, but within its stillness, within its ordinary rhythm, something occurred that carried enough weight to echo through time. This is the story of the day the village mill turned without any visible power, and of how the people who depended upon it struggled to understand what it meant for their lives. The settlement was small enough that its name appeared in only a handful of manuscripts, and even then only in the margins of tax records. It sat amid gently rising hills that were neither impressive nor barren. The lands produced a reliable harvest, though never a spectacular one. The people who lived there worked steadily, prayed dutifully, and expected nothing more from life than survival, a warm hearth, and the hope of an uneventful winter. At the heart of the community stood the mill. It was not a grand structure, merely a tall post mill with broad wooden arms. Long planks shaped the sails, angled to catch the wind that swept across the open land. The noise of its turning was a comforting sound to the villagers, a steady groaning and creaking that meant grain was being ground, flour was being made, and bread would eventually reach every table. The miller, a man named Gerlach, had inherited the position from his father, who had inherited it from his own. Gerlach was a quiet man in middle age, his hands calloused, his hair turning pale early from years of sun and stress. He was not a talkative soul, but he knew every beam and joint in the mill. He could hear a problem forming long before it became visible. People trusted him, not because he was warm or friendly, but because he was steady. Life around the mill followed familiar patterns. Farmers arrived carrying sacks of grain on their backs. Children lingered near the door to watch the gears turning, mesmerized by the steady rotation. When the wind died, work stopped. When the wind blew strong, Gerlach worked late into the evening, keeping pace with the villagers' needs. Nothing about the place suggested that anything remarkable would ever occur. Yet one late autumn morning, when a soft mist clung to the marsh and the air held not the faintest stirring of wind, something changed. Gerlach rose before dawn, as he did every day during the harvest season. He dressed quietly, stepped outside, and immediately noticed the heavy stillness in the air. The reed beds near the marsh stood motionless. Not a single leaf trembled. Even the smoke from nearby hearths rose straight upward in thin, wavering lines. No wind meant no work. That was a fact as unassailable as hunger. Gerlach did not bother to hurry. He walked toward the mill at a leisurely pace, boots squelching through the dew-soaked ground. He expected to find the sails perfectly still, the building silent. Instead, he heard the unmistakable groan of wood under motion. For a moment, he froze, unsure if his ears were betraying him. But as he stepped closer, the sound sharpened. The mill was moving. Slowly, steadily, its great arms turned through the air. He quickened his pace and circled around the base of the mill. The sails continued their rotation. Not fast, but with purpose. Gerlach looked upward, scanning the sky. There was no wind, not even the ghost of a breeze. The calm was so complete that it unnerved him. He placed his hand against the wooden post that supported the structure. The rhythmic vibration was unmistakable. It was working, grinding grain, turning as though driven by invisible hands. For a long moment, Gerlach stood still, listening, And then, instinct born of decades of responsibility overcame his shock. If the mill was turning, it was his duty to tend it, to understand what was happening, to keep it from breaking under whatever force drove it. He stepped inside. The interior of the mill was dim, lit only by soft morning light seeping through the gaps in the wood. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, yet the machinery moved with quiet determination. The shaft turned, the gears pressed grain against stone. Nothing appeared out of place, except the absence of any force that should have been making it happen. Gerlach inspected every beam, every joint, every connection. He checked for hidden ropes, for weights, for signs of mischief. He found none. The mill had no secret mechanisms. It was as simple and honest as the people it served. Eventually he stepped outside again and stared up at the sails. He waited to feel even the faintest breeze, any sign that he might have overlooked something obvious. The air remained still. The mill turned anyway. He felt unease growing inside him. The last thing he wanted was the villagers hearing of this before he understood it himself. Rumors spread faster than truth, and the settlement had always leaned towards superstition. They did not fear the world out of ignorance, but out of experience. Storms could flatten a harvest. Illness could sweep through without warning. War bands could appear on the horizon. Life was uncertain enough. They did not need mysteries added to it. Gerlach tried to steady his mind. Perhaps the ground beneath the mill had shifted. Perhaps the early light created an illusion. Perhaps the sail's weight was causing a slow, natural descent. But no matter how he tested these theories, none held. He was still wrestling with them when he heard footsteps behind him. It was Edda, the cobbler's wife, carrying a small sack of rye. She stopped short when she saw the moving sails. "There is no wind," she said quietly. Gerlach felt a wave of dread wash over him. He knew what came next. Edda stepped closer, eyes wide. "How long has it been turning?" Gerlach hesitated. If he lied, she would know. If he told the truth, word would spread. "Since I arrived," he said finally. "It began before dawn." Edda clutched her sack tighter. "You must tell the reeve, or the priest." "No," Gerlach said quickly. "Not yet. Let me understand it first." But Edda was already backing away, her breath uneven. Fear moved faster than her feet. Before she disappeared around the bend, she cast one more glance at the mill, as though it might suddenly leap from its post. Within 2 hours, every villager knew. And within 2 more, they gathered in a tight circle around the miller, staring at the turning sails with disbelief, unease, and the beginnings of something deeper. They asked questions Gerlach could not answer. They demanded explanations he did not possess. The priest arrived, prayed quietly, and admitted he had never encountered anything like it. The reeve ordered the mill be stopped, but the moment they tried, the sails pushed back with a strength that startled even the strongest men. Not overwhelming strength, but enough that the movement felt willful. They retreated in silence. The mill continued to turn. As the day stretched on, theories multiplied. Some whispered that a saint had touched the mill. Others murmured about sorcery. A few wondered whether the miller himself had made an unholy bargain. Gerlach felt the weight of these suspicions like stones on his shoulders. He had lived his whole life within sight of these people. He had ground their grain, repaired their tools, tended their machinery. But fear changed memories. It reshaped trust. By evening, the villagers divided into camps. Some believed the mill's continued movement was a blessing. Others believed it a warning. A few wanted to dismantle the structure entirely before anything worse occurred. The reeve called a gathering in the square. Torches were lit. Voices grew tense. Gerlach stood among them, hands clasped in front of him, feeling as though his entire life had pivoted on a single, unexplainable morning. When the reeve asked for his thoughts, he stepped forward and spoke with the plain honesty that had defined his role all these years. "I do not know why the mill turns," he said, "but nothing within it has changed. There is no new gear, no rope, no weight, no trick. I cannot say whether it is a blessing or a warning. I only know it is doing the work it was built to do, and I cannot stop it." The villagers murmured. Some nodded, some frowned, some folded their arms and looked toward the mill as though expecting it to crumble or explode. The priest raised his hands to quiet the crowd. "We will watch it," he said. "We will not destroy what we do not yet understand." The reeve hesitated, then agreed. But understanding did not come. The mill continued its slow, steady motion through the night, through the next morning, and through the day after that. The stillness of the air remained unbroken. And with each turn of the mill's sails, the villagers felt a growing mixture of awe and unease. Because when something built upon predictable forces ignores them, it shakes more than the building itself. It shakes the world as people believe it to be. As the second night approached, and the mill continued its unbroken, windless motion, each villager carried a quiet question in their heart. If the mill could turn without wind, what else in their world could move without reason, without cause, without warning? And what unseen force pushed those sails through the still, unmoving air? You rise again from the quiet path, where we left the wandering pilgrim, and step once more into the slow-turning world of the medieval journeyer. You find yourself walking beside him, following the worn earth lanes that weave across the continent like faint veins. These roads never rushed, they simply continued, step after step, shaped by thousands of quiet feet moving toward shrines, markets, and uncertain destinations. In this second part of the story, you walk deeper, moving with him through the subtler corners of daily travel, the steady march of distance, measured not in miles but in footsteps, and the small observations that defined a pilgrim's life. As the morning settles, the landscape opens its pale, muted colors. The air holds the heavy scent of damp soil, and the whisper of grass brushed by a cold breeze. The pilgrim walks at the same steady pace he has kept for many weeks. His stride is not fast, not forceful, but patient. Every morning he resumes exactly where he left off, picking up the rhythm of the road like a familiar chant. Pilgrimage was rarely about urgency. It was about endurance, and most of all, about repetition. You notice how he carries his weight. He leans slightly forward under the long wooden staff he uses, not only for support but for sounding the ground ahead of him. Each tap helps him judge firmness, or warns him of muddy patches, or simply reassures him that the path is real beneath his feet. His pack is light, filled only with what he cannot survive without: a spare tunic, a strip of salted fish, a small piece of hard bread, saved from yesterday's charity, a water skin that never seems full enough. This simplicity was not unusual. Medieval pilgrims learned to travel with fewer possessions than you might expect. Too much weight risked slowing them, or worse, exhausting them long before reaching a place where they could rest. You see the pilgrim stopping now and then to shift the strap of his pack, adjusting it across his shoulder, easing pressure on muscles that have carried the same burden for day after steady day. It is not dramatic. It is ordinary work, the type of work history often ignores. Along the side of the road, a thin stream follows the route. Its water is slow, filled with leaves, its surface reflecting the grey sky. The pilgrim kneels at its edge, cupping his hands into the cold water and lifting a drink slowly to his mouth. He never rushes. Rushing wastes strength. A pilgrim understood that the body must be treated gently if it is expected to travel long distances. He splashes his face, letting the cold revive him. His breaths even out, his shoulders lower. You watch him as he rises again, brushing the dust from his knees. He continues. The path curves to the right and leads toward a village whose thatched roofs you can see in the distance. Smoke curls from one or two chimneys, rising in thin grey strands that drift away into the breeze. He knows that if he reaches the village before dusk, the local church might take him in for the night. It is a familiar pattern. Churches did not always offer comfort, but they nearly always offered shelter. As he approaches, he is greeted with cautious eyes. Villagers stare from doorways or half-hidden windows. Pilgrims were common, yet always regarded with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. A stranger arriving with a staff and a patched cloak could be a holy wanderer, or he could be an outcast, or worse, a carrier of illness. You can sense the tension in the air as he walks past a woman drawing water from a well. She averts her gaze, tightening her grip on the bucket rope. The pilgrim is used to this. He offers the traditional greeting, raising 2 fingers in a sign of peace. The gesture reassures her. Slowly, cautiously, she nods in return. Inside the village, the surroundings grow narrow. Houses lean inward, as if whispering secrets to each other. Above the pilgrim's head, wooden beams are worn and crooked, patched over generations. The lanes between buildings smell of damp straw and smoke. Somewhere, unseen, a child laughs. Somewhere else, a door slams. The pilgrim walks directly toward the small church at the center. It is modest, built from uneven stones gathered from the surrounding fields. Its roof is low, covered with grey slate, As he pushes the heavy wooden door open, he steps into the dim interior. Light falls from a single window, illuminating drifting dust and the worn wooden benches. A priest looks up from his writing table. The priest studies him in silence. The pilgrim removes his hat, bowing his head. The priest, after a long moment, gestures for him to enter. He understands the request before it is spoken. Pilgrims did not always need to explain themselves. Their clothing, their posture, and the long dust of travel already told the story. The priest allows him a simple mat in the corner for the night. Before lying down, the pilgrim helps sweep the floor and carry a small bucket of water from the nearby well. Churches gave shelter, but not without expecting some quiet labor in return. These expectations were simple and reasonable. A pilgrim earned rest through work. As evening approaches, you remain beside him inside the stone walls of the church. The candlelight glows softly. The priest murmurs his evening prayers, his voice echoing gently under the low ceiling. The pilgrim sits in silence, hands folded, absorbing the warmth of the room. He observes everything closely, not out of curiosity, but out of habit. A traveler must always be aware of his surroundings. Even a sacred space could hold risk. Yet here, he feels safe enough to loosen the straps of his pack and stretch his tired legs. After a small meal of broth and coarse bread, the priest asks about his route. The pilgrim speaks quietly of where he has come from and where he hopes to go. His destination is still far, but he does not speak of the distance in terms of days or miles. In his mind, the journey is measured only by the strength of his will and the patience of his feet. The priest nods slowly, understanding the nature of pilgrimage far better than many who stayed in the village all their lives. When the evening finally stills, the pilgrim lies on his mat. The wind rattles gently against the wooden shutters. You can hear every breath he takes, slow and even, as he drifts into the heavy sleep that only a weary traveler knows. His staff rests beside him. His pack lies within reach. Even in sleep, nothing is left unwatched. Morning comes quietly. The pilgrim rises before the priest, fastening his cloak and adjusting the strap of his pack once again. He accepts a blessing spoken in a soft tone. He bows, steps back into the cool air, and resumes his journey. The road slopes upward beyond the village. You follow him as the day warms, as the scent of wild herbs drifts from the roadside, and as the faint chirping of unseen birds fills the space around you. The pilgrim keeps his pace steady, sometimes humming a distant tune learned long ago. His thoughts wander to past travelers he met, to stories exchanged beside fires, to warnings murmured in passing. Every piece of advice, no matter how small, shapes how he moves through the world. You observe how he studies the sky each morning. Clouds could warn of approaching storms, and storms could trap a traveler for long stretches. Sudden weather might wash out a road, turn a small stream into a rushing barrier, or force a pilgrim to take refuge in a stranger's barn. Being alert to small changes meant survival. The pilgrim's wisdom lies not in dramatic decisions, but in thousands of small observations. As midday passes, he meets another traveler on the road. She is older, wearing a cloak that has seen better years. Her staff is shorter, marked with carvings she made herself during long, lonely evenings. The two greet each other with the cautious friendliness of those who understand the hardships of the road. They walk together for a time, exchanging simple words. She speaks of a flooded bridge ahead and advises him to follow the ridge path instead. Such information, passed quietly from traveler to traveler, was as valuable as any map. Maps existed, but most were crude, often inaccurate, and rarely available to common pilgrims. They part as gently as they met. She heads in one direction, he in another, each carrying the faint comfort that companionship, even brief, can offer. You see him look back once, watching as her figure disappears behind a bend in the path. Evening approaches once more. The landscape changes as he ascends a low hillside. Trees grow closer together, forming a narrow, shadowed corridor. The path is uneven, scattered with stones. Each step must be chosen carefully. Here he slows. His staff taps thoughtfully at the ground. The forest seems quiet, yet not empty. Somewhere within it, hidden behind layers of branches, someone may be watching. Travel at dusk was risky. Many pilgrims tried to reach a settlement before nightfall, but the road did not always cooperate. You sense his caution as the shadows deepen. He keeps his pace steady, his senses sharp, scanning the trees for movement. A rustle, a distant bird call, the faint crack of a branch, all of it matters. By the time darkness settles, He reaches a clearing where a ruined stone structure stands. It was perhaps a watch post long ago, or a storage building, or something else entirely. What matters now is that it provides a place to rest. He enters through a gap in the wall, feeling the cool stone beneath his hand. He sits in a corner, using his pack as a cushion, his staff positioned across his knees for quick use if needed. He does not light a fire. Fire invites attention. Instead, he waits in silence, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dark. The forest beyond whispers with the soft sounds of night. A small animal scurries near the doorway. He listens. He breathes. He remains alert, balanced somewhere between rest and wakefulness. And here you sit beside him, watching as he keeps this quiet vigil, as he settles into the deep patience required of all who travel long distances on foot. You begin to understand how much mental endurance a pilgrim needed. It was not only the physical hardship that shaped the journey, but the long hours of waiting, watching, and listening. The journey was as much an inward discipline as an outward one. But as you sit within the crumbling walls of this forgotten structure, another question begins to form, one that lingers in the cool air around you. His path has carried him far, yet so much remains unknown. What unseen challenge will the pilgrim face next? And how will the choices he makes tomorrow change the direction of his long and quiet road? You find yourself waking beside the pilgrim at the edge of dawn, inside the ruined stone shelter where night kept both of you motionless and alert. The forest outside still holds its deep breath, as if reluctant to release the darkness that settled through the long hours, yet a faint line of pale color lies low on the horizon, telling you that morning has come. In this final section of the story, you will follow the pilgrim through the last and most uncertain stretch of his journey, observing how each quiet choice and small hardship shapes the conclusion of this long road. He rises slowly, careful with each movement. A night spent half asleep on cold stone can stiffen even the strongest limbs, and you can see the way his shoulders roll gently as he tries to ease the strain held there. He tightens the strap of his pack, checks his staff for any cracks or damage, and steps out into the cool morning air with the measured calm of someone who has repeated this ritual many times. The forest greets him with long, slanted rays of early light filtering through the canopy. Dew clings to the edges of leaves and glitters faintly on spider threads woven between low branches. You follow as he walks along the narrow path, stepping over roots that twist across the ground like ancient fingers. The forest is quiet, but not silent. Birds begin their morning calls. Leaves rustle gently. Every small sound marks the beginning of another day of walking. His destination is still distant, yet close enough now that the thought of reaching it stirs something inside him. It is not excitement, nor pride, but a steady sense of responsibility. Pilgrims often traveled far not out of hope for reward, but out of a quiet belief that finishing what one started was a way of honoring life itself. His purpose remains simple, though its roots run deep. He walks to fulfill a vow made long ago, a promise shaped by grief or gratitude, or perhaps something else entirely. As the path descends toward open land, the sound of rushing water becomes clearer. A river lies ahead, its current carrying fragments of leaves downstream. The pilgrim stands at its edge, studying the flow. The old bridge that once crossed this river has collapsed, leaving only broken beams that jut above the waterline like worn teeth. Crossing here would be dangerous. You see him kneel, touching the water with his hand, feeling the strength of the current. He withdraws, thinking. Then he begins to walk upstream, searching for a place where the river narrows. This is another part of the pilgrim's discipline, one learned not from books but from experience, the acceptance that progress is never linear. The detour is not failure, it is simply reality. Walking along the bank, he eventually reaches a shallow ford, where stones rise, just high enough for careful passage. He steps into the cold water, using his staff to balance and test each foothold. The water pushes against his legs, but he moves slowly and steadily. When he reaches the opposite bank, he stops for a moment to wring water from the hem of his cloak, watching droplets fall onto the soil. Beyond the river, the land rises gradually into low hills dotted with small farms. Smoke curls from the chimneys of scattered cottages. You and the pilgrim follow a narrow lane lined with hedges. As he passes, dogs bark from behind wooden fences. A farmer glances up from his work, hands covered with the deep brown of freshly turned earth. Some villagers nod, others look away. Pilgrims were common, yet their presence always reminded settled folk of the broader world beyond their fields, a world filled with uncertainty and wandering. The pilgrim pauses at a well near a crossroads. He lowers the bucket, drawing water with slow, steady motions. After drinking, he sits on the well's stone edge, gazing ahead toward a ridge where a faint, distant shape stands against the sky. Though still far, the silhouette is unmistakable, a shrine built upon a hill, the place he has been moving toward over many patient days. You sense no rush in him as he observes it. If anything, there is a strange softness in his expression, as though reaching the place itself matters less than the fact that he continued walking toward it, despite all the small difficulties along the way. His breath steadies, his shoulders settle. Then he rises again. The climb to the ridge is long, the path is dry, scattered with loose stones that shift beneath each step. The sun grows warm overhead, pressing down with slow weight. For a while neither of you speak or think, you simply walk. The pilgrim's breathing forms a gentle rhythm, a quiet reminder that endurance is not built from strength alone but from the willingness to keep moving when the body begins to falter. Halfway up the ridge, he stops at a patch of shade beneath a small grove of trees. He removes his pack, stretching his back carefully before sitting on the ground. From inside the pack, he draws the last of his hard bread. It is stale, nearly difficult to break, but he eats slowly, chewing each piece with patience. Hunger teaches one to appreciate even the most modest meal. While he eats, he closes his eyes for a brief moment, not sleeping but conserving the small reserve of energy that will carry him up the final ascent. When he stands again, the shrine appears much closer. It is a simple structure made of pale stone, weathered by countless seasons. Grass grows among the stones surrounding it. A small wooden marker leans beside the entrance, carved with faint lines that once held words now too faded to read. As the pilgrim approaches, he removes his hat once more. He steps inside the shrine, ducking slightly beneath the low doorway. The interior is dim but clean. Someone, perhaps a caretaker from a nearby village, tends it from time to time, sweeping the floor and clearing away leaves that drift in on the wind. The pilgrim kneels. You stand just behind him watching. He places his staff on the ground beside him. His pack rests against the wall. For the first time in many days, he seems still not only in body but in spirit. The weight he has carried, an invisible burden shaped by memory and intention, begins to loosen. This shrine represents an ending for him, but it also represents something more subtle. A place like this does not erase past grief or resolve every unanswered question. Instead, it offers a space where the slow work of traveling, of enduring, of remaining faithful to a long path, becomes meaningful simply because it was done. Pilgrimages were not always journeys of revelation. Often they were journeys of quiet acceptance. He remains kneeling for a long while, his silence filling the small space. Perhaps he remembers someone. Perhaps he honors a promise. Perhaps he seeks forgiveness, or clarity, or simply rest. You realize that the purpose driving him was never meant to be dramatic. The world remembers great quests and heroic adventures, but most medieval travelers walked for reasons that today might seem small and deeply personal. After a long time, the pilgrim stands again. He touches the stone wall gently, tracing its rough texture with the tips of his fingers. Then he steps back into the light, blinking as the brightness settles across his face. But his journey does not end here. The shrine marks the closing of a vow, yet it does not mean he will return home immediately. Many pilgrims continued wandering for a season after reaching their destination, seeking work, shelter, or new paths that felt quietly aligned with the inward changes they experienced along the road. The pilgrim seems to understand this. He looks out across the hills, as if considering where his feet should carry him next. You walk beside him as he descends the ridge. The road ahead leads toward new villages, new strangers, new shelters, and new hardships. Yet he does not seem troubled by the uncertainty. Traveling has become part of him. The rhythm of the road has shaped his thoughts and softened his fears. He now carries the quiet strength earned from walking great distances with patience, humility, and endurance. As you follow him down the slope, a thought lingers in the air around you. It settles slowly, like dust drifting through sunlight. The pilgrim's journey brought him to the place he sought, but as he turns toward the unknown, you wonder what he will become now that the vow is complete. Will he return to the life he left behind, or will the long road keep calling him forward into new places and unfamiliar days? And just as you begin to consider the path ahead, another question forms, one that settles gently upon your thoughts. What new direction will the pilgrim choose now that his purpose has been fulfilled? And how might the lessons of his quiet endurance shape the rest of his wandering life? You return once more to the quiet landscape of the medieval world, a place where the ordinary rhythms of life flowed with unhurried steadiness. Fields ripened slowly, markets bustled only on certain days. People lived by the slow turning of seasons, guided by routine more than ambition. But this time, you are stepping into a moment when the familiar order of the sky itself seemed to shift. This story follows the quiet reactions, simple fears, and hushed interpretations of a strange celestial sight, witnessed by people who depended deeply on the heavens to guide their days. In this first section of the story, you walk through the dimly lit past, joining the villagers who saw something unusual appear overhead one long evening. Not a violent spectacle, not a tale of prophecy or legend, but a subtle event that sparked murmurs, shaped beliefs, and lingered in the memories of ordinary people. A faint streak of shifting light, drifting across the night like a pale breath of color, at a time when most medieval folk rarely traveled beyond the borders of their own villages. The sky was the vast unknown they faced each night, and when something unexpected crossed it, their thoughts drifted as far as they ever would. The story begins in a small settlement surrounded by soft hills and patches of forest. The village is quiet at dusk. Smoke from cooking fires rises above the rooftops, curling in slow spirals that fade into the cooling air. You can almost smell the faint mixture of smoke, earth, and damp straw. The day's work is finished. Sheep have been herded into their pens. Tools have been set aside. The last rays of sunlight slip behind the hills, leaving the sky a deepening blue. As night settles, the villagers gather outside their homes, speaking in low voices. It is a simple habit, this gathering. Before sleep, they share the last few moments of the day, exchanging modest observations, discussing weather, and offering small remarks about the next day's work. You can hear their murmurs, soft and steady, blending with the chirping of insects. No one expects the sky to do anything unusual. The heavens were the most consistent part of their existence. They looked upward for the time of year, for the changing seasons, for the signs that guided planting, harvesting, and traveling. And yet, this evening is different. You notice it first as a faint glow near the northern horizon. A thin line of pale green light flickers in the darkness, almost imperceptible at first. It shifts gently, like a strand of silk caught in a breeze. No one pays attention until one of the children, sleepy and wandering, tugs at an elder's sleeve and points upward. The villagers turn their heads. Their quiet conversation fades. The light grows stronger, spreading across the sky in a slow, wavering movement. It is soft, not blazing or sharp, but delicate, like brushed color flowing through the night. Pale green deepens to soft hazel. A faint ripple of rose appears along the edge of the glow. The sight unfolds gradually, leaving the villagers staring upward in silence. No one here has words for it. They have seen stars, comets, and rare eclipses. They have heard monks speak of celestial order and the turning of heavenly spheres. But this drifting, shimmering light does not fit into their familiar explanations. It is too fluid, too gentle, too strange. A woman steps forward, pulling her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. She whispers a quiet prayer, though she cannot say exactly what she is praying for. A man beside her squints, trying to decide whether the shape in the sky is a sign of something approaching, or simply a strange reflection of the world above. A few of the elders exchange looks, remembering stories they heard long ago from travelers who passed through, speaking of lights that sometimes wandered across the far northern skies. But none of them truly knows what they are seeing. You stand among them, watching as the glow expands, its colors deepening. The villagers do not shout or panic. Their fear is quiet, woven with curiosity. Medieval people often faced uncertainty with a kind of humble restraint, accepting that the world held many things beyond their control. For them, a strange light in the sky was not a cause for chaos, but a signal from a realm they rarely questioned. Their minds reached for meaning, even if the meaning was unclear. The village priest emerges from the church, drawn by the murmurs. His robe is thin, worn at the edges from years of use. He looks up at the sight, his face thoughtful. He has studied the small collection of texts copied in the church's possession. He has read accounts written by scholars far away, describing the changing heavens in more detail than most villagers could imagine. But even he has no certain answer for this shifting glow. He calls for calm, though the villagers are already quiet. He suggests that the light might be a reflection of divine order, a gentle reminder that the heavens move according to a will greater than theirs. His voice carries softly across the gathering. Some villagers nod, others hesitate. A few draw closer to one another, as though companionship alone might anchor them against the strange and beautiful sight above. As the glow brightens, shadows shift across the ground. The nearby rooftops gain a faint gleam, as though brushed by moonlight, even though the moon is not visible tonight. The fields beyond the village take on a pale tint, the grass shimmering gently. The livestock stir uneasily in their pens, though none attempt to break free. They simply shift their weight, grunting and snorting in confused discomfort. The priest walks a few steps farther, tilting his head to examine the sky. His thoughts are careful. He knows better than to offer explanations he cannot support. In this age, even learned men recognized the limits of their knowledge. The sky held mysteries accessible only to patience and observation. Meanwhile, the villagers whisper among themselves. Some speculate that the light might herald a change in weather. Others fear illness or famine. One man, older than most, breathes slowly, recalling a tale told by his own father many seasons ago. He remembers hearing about a night when lights danced across the sky, followed by a harsh winter that took several lives. He tells the story quietly, his voice steady but tinged with worry. The younger villagers listen, wondering whether this light carries similar meaning. You observe how the crowd shifts gradually from confusion to contemplation. They speak softly, share memories, and seek comfort in familiar faces. In truth, the sight above them is neither omen nor miracle. It is a rare natural phenomenon, but they cannot know that. All they know is that the heavens have changed without warning, and such moments always held weight in their minds. As the night deepens, the colors in the sky grow richer. Waves of pale green ripple across the stars, blending into soft rose and faint gold. The motion is gentle, never sharp. It resembles the glow of distant lanterns drifting behind thin curtains. The villagers grow still, watching with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. The children lean forward, fascinated. The adults remain cautious, unsure how to interpret what they see. The priest eventually suggests a prayer, not out of fear, but out of habit, out of a belief that moments beyond human understanding should be met with humility rather than certainty. The villagers bow their heads. Their voices join in a slow, steady chant that rises softly into the cool night air. It is a simple prayer, asking for protection and peace. But even as they pray, many of them continue to glance upward, unable to look away from the flowing colors. In their hearts, quiet questions form. What force shapes this movement? Why does it appear now after so many nights of familiar darkness? And perhaps most importantly, what does it mean for their lives, for their fields, for their families? Such questions settle deeply within them, shaping the way they recall this night for many seasons to come. After a long while, the lights begin to fade. The pale glow thins, softens, and gradually dissolves into the dark. The villagers remain gathered, waiting until the sky returns to its usual shape. When the last trace of color disappears, they finally begin to drift back toward their homes. Their footsteps crunch softly on the dirt paths. Doors close one by one. The village returns to quiet, though the air feels different now, as though touched by something distant. You stay beside the priest as he lingers near the church. He lifts his gaze one final time before turning away. Though he does not speak his thoughts aloud, his expression reveals a mind wrestling with interpretation. He knows that this sight will affect the villagers differently. Some will worry, some will feel awe, some will speak of it for many winters. Others will try to forget it, but the moment itself has already become part of their shared memory. When dawn finally arrives, the villagers will wake and go about their work as always. They will gather water, feed their animals, and begin the slow labor that defines their days. But beneath the surface of their routines, a quiet tension will linger. The sky changed, even if only for a single night, and such changes leave impressions that shape how people perceive the world. As you walk through the settling darkness, leaving the last whispers of the fading lights behind you, one question emerges. It sinks deep and rests gently on your thoughts, waiting for the next part of the story. What quiet consequences will unfold after this strange night? And how will these villagers carry the memory of the shifting sky into the days and seasons ahead? You return once more to the village that witnessed the strange shimmer in the night sky. The evening has passed, but its memory lingers like a faint fragrance on the air. People carry the memory quietly, not as a spectacle to recount at the market, but as something that weighs softly on their minds. In this second part, you walk with them through the slow unfolding of reaction, the careful attempts to interpret the strange phenomenon, and the subtle ways it shapes their routines, conversations, and sense of order. Morning comes with a grey light that slips over the rooftops and falls on the dew-soaked fields. The villagers move with their familiar rhythm, tending animals, preparing food, and repairing tools. Yet beneath this routine lies a subtle disturbance. Conversations start to revolve around the night's lights. Children repeat what they remember in fragments, while elders reflect on patterns that may connect the unusual glow with the harvest, the weather, or the fate of neighboring villages. None of the talk is urgent, yet all of it carries weight. The priest notices the shift in attention. He speaks gently during morning prayers, reminding the villagers that the heavens have always held wonders beyond human understanding, and that faith requires patience as well as devotion. Some nod quietly, taking comfort in his words. Others still glance upward whenever a cloud drifts across the sky, wondering if something similar might reappear. You can sense the tension between curiosity and caution, a tension that has defined the medieval mind for generations. Over the next days, villagers begin recording what they can remember. Farmers note the time the lights appeared, the direction they moved, and the colors that flickered across the night. A few literate villagers mark these observations in small notebooks, while others share the details verbally, adding impressions, emotions, and small embellishments that make the story richer but less precise. The act of remembering becomes a kind of ritual, as if noting the phenomenon can make it more understandable, or perhaps even predictable. Merchants passing through the village hear whispers and raise eyebrows. Tales of strange skies spread slowly beyond the fields, carried by travelers, muleteers, and wandering artisans. By the time the news reaches neighboring settlements, it has already become a curious story of the supernatural, though the villagers insist it was only colors and movement in the sky, nothing more. Yet people are naturally drawn to stories of the unexplained. Even minor anomalies inspire awe and caution. Meanwhile, practical matters resume. Fields need tending, animals require feeding, bread must be baked. The glow of the sky may have shifted perception, but it does not replace daily labor, yet it shapes the way the villagers act, subtly influencing how they interpret natural signs, the direction of the wind, the pattern of clouds, the behavior of birds. The sky that whispered secrets at night leaves its imprint on daylight routines. One evening, a traveling scholar arrives, carrying manuscripts and instruments. He has seen unusual lights in other regions and brings simple explanations. He speaks of rare atmospheric phenomena, reflections of solar winds and auroras, though such terms are unfamiliar to most villagers. His words do not fully satisfy them, yet they offer a thread of rationality that tempers superstition. Some villagers accept the explanation eagerly, others remain skeptical, holding to the quiet belief that the heavens communicate directly with those who watch them carefully. You watch as the village adapts. Life continues. But something subtle has changed. The sky no longer feels entirely predictable. Children play under the open air with a faint, lingering curiosity. Farmers glance upward as they plow. Even the priest sometimes pauses mid-ritual to consider the mysteries above. The village has not been transformed by spectacle, but its people have learned that ordinary routines can coexist with extraordinary events. They carry both in quiet balance. By the end of the week, the glow has not returned. The villagers grow accustomed to the absence of movement in the sky, yet memories remain vivid. The story of the strange night circulates at hearths and workshops, carried forward as part of the collective memory. It is not a tale of miracles, nor is it a tale of terror. It is a story of observation, reflection, and the subtle reshaping of perception. As days pass into weeks, subtle questions persist. Will the skies shift again? Are the lights a rare but natural occurrence, or something that carries meaning beyond human understanding? And for those who watched, did the event change the way they perceive their place in the world, even if only slightly, in ways too quiet to measure? In the quiet of one evening, you stand beside the priest on the hill, overlooking the village. The sun has set, and the sky holds the faint glow of twilight. He points toward the stars, his voice calm. The heavens may speak in ways we cannot yet understand, he says softly. Our duty is not to command them, but to notice, to reflect, and to act with patience. And as you leave the hill, the thought lingers. How do ordinary people measure the extraordinary? How do they hold space for wonder without abandoning routine, or let uncertainty coexist with survival? The village awakens to another quiet morning, the memory of the strange night still resting lightly over rooftops, fields, and narrow streets. Yet this time, you notice a shift in the way people move, speak, and observe the world around them. In this final section of the story, you follow the villagers as they integrate the memory of the shifting sky into their lives, and you witness how subtle events can leave lasting impressions on ordinary existence. Farmers rise early, tending to animals with their usual steady care, yet a few pause mid-task, glancing at the horizon where the colors once danced. Birds appear to them in a slightly different light. The wind across the fields seems to carry subtle warnings or signals that previously would have gone unnoticed. Children gather near the well, recounting in hushed whispers the fleeting lights they saw, exaggerating details, but never fabricating the feeling of awe that accompanied the vision. In these small ways, the extraordinary has become intertwined with the mundane. The priest continues his work, visiting households, leading prayers, and assisting the sick and elderly, but he also engages the villagers in conversation about the heavens, asking them what they saw, what they felt, and what lessons, however small, they might carry forward. His questions are quiet, gentle, guiding them toward reflection rather than fear. He knows that knowledge of natural phenomena is limited, yet reflection can create understanding deeper than explanation alone. Merchants and travelers continue to pass through, bringing news of distant towns and the occasional sighting of similar lights elsewhere. Some speak confidently of rare atmospheric events, while others insist on mystical or divine interpretations. The villagers listen, learn, and adapt, allowing multiple perspectives to coexist. Their understanding of the world has expanded, but not in a dramatic fashion. Instead, it grows in layers, subtle and cumulative, shaping how they perceive patterns, anticipate changes, and interpret signals from both nature and the wider human community. Even daily routines are altered, in small, almost imperceptible ways. When ploughing the fields, farmers pause to observe clouds, their positions, and shifting colors at dawn or dusk. Children carry stories of the night sky as a form of entertainment, yet they also absorb a quiet lesson in attention, patience, and the impermanence of unusual events. Neighbors speak in tones soft enough not to alarm, but to share the wonder quietly, reinforcing the shared human experience of witnessing something beyond immediate comprehension. Over time, the vividness of the memory fades from the immediate eye, but it remains etched in thought, shaping perspectives and guiding subtle behaviors. The village learns that even a single fleeting moment of the extraordinary can reshape how people act, speak, and think, without overtly disrupting their routines. The story is not a legend of heroism, nor a tale of divine wrath. It is a story of observation, endurance, reflection, and adaptation, the core of what it meant to live through countless small but significant events in the medieval world. Even years later, villagers who witnessed the strange night recall it quietly to younger generations. Children listen with fascination, not for fear, but for the deep, lingering curiosity it inspires. Travelers passing through the village hear murmurs of the event, passing the story further into the world, and for those who remember standing beneath the shifting lights, there is a lasting understanding that even ordinary lives are shaped in small ways by the extraordinary, the mysterious, and the unforeseen. As you leave the village behind, the sky opens above you, calm and unremarkable, yet you carry the quiet lesson with you. Even a single unusual night can ripple through years, shaping observation, behavior, and understanding in ways invisible but enduring. The villagers learn not to command the sky, nor to fear it. They learn to notice, to reflect, and to live with curiosity tempered by routine. And as you consider the scene one last time, the thought settles gently. How often do ordinary lives brush against the extraordinary without realizing it? How many small shifts in perception quietly ripple across history, shaping the way people survive, adapt, and remember? You step into a quiet town nestled along a winding river, where the rhythm of life moves with the slow pulse of trade and the unhurried current of water. This story follows a man who, for reasons long forgotten by the townspeople, never spoke, not for a day, a week, or even a year, but for decades. In this first section you will walk alongside him, observing how a life shaped by silence interacts with the bustling world of medieval commerce, and how ordinary people adapt to the presence of someone entirely different from themselves. The town is modest, its streets narrow and lined with timber-framed houses, whose upper floors overhang the uneven cobblestones below. Smoke rises from chimneys in thin spirals, carrying the scent of burning peat, bread, and the occasional hint of livestock. Early morning is a time of preparation. Merchants sweep their stalls, fishermen unload their catch, and artisans sharpen tools for the day ahead. You follow the silent merchant as he moves through this scene, his presence noted but rarely questioned. He wears a simple tunic, patched at the elbows and frayed at the hem. A small satchel hangs from his shoulder, carrying the modest goods he trades. Nothing about his appearance suggests wealth or power, yet he moves with a quiet confidence. People step aside to allow him passage, not because he is feared, but because they have grown accustomed to the gentle authority of his silence. It is a presence that demands attention, yet requires no explanation. Unlike other merchants who shout prices or call out greetings, he relies entirely on gestures and careful signs. A hand lifted, a nod, a small display of goods is enough to communicate intent. Buyers who know him well exchange coins and items with near-perfect understanding. He has lived in this town for decades, and in that time, the language of his hands and expressions has become as precise and trusted as speech itself. You can almost imagine that the marketplace hums with a silent rhythm, punctuated by the faintest flickers of motion, subtle signals, and shared glances. The people around him treat his silence with the same casual acceptance they reserve for other aspects of life. They do not fully control. Some are curious. Some speculate about the reasons behind it. Others shrug, content to accommodate his difference without pressing for answers. You notice a young boy trailing nearby, attempting to imitate the merchant's gestures, a playful exploration of communication beyond words. The man pauses, offering a subtle smile, and the boy's eyes light up with a mixture of understanding and wonder. At midday, the merchant reaches the river dock where his small boat waits. The current is gentle, carrying leaves and small twigs downstream. He loads his wares with careful attention, balancing baskets of grain, cloth, and small trinkets, so that none tips or spills. A fellow boatman nods in silent greeting, and the two exchange subtle signs to coordinate the loading. The river will take some goods to neighboring towns, and each gesture must be precise, for errors are costly. Travel along the river is slow and methodical. The merchant moves, as though in constant dialogue with the world around him, observing the water's flow, the wind on the surface, and the subtle shifts in the sky that might suggest rain. His attention to these details is part of a survival strategy honed over decades. While others may speak and bargain, he relies on keen observation, steady hands, and the quiet authority of his presence. Every movement, every decision, is measured and deliberate. Arriving at a neighboring village, he navigates the narrow streets with care. People glance at him curiously, recognizing him from distant visits, though few know the story behind his silence. His gestures are universally understood: a raised hand to request entry, a careful arrangement of goods on a stall, a pointed glance to indicate quantity. He does not need speech, yet he commands engagement and trust through quiet skill. As evening falls, the merchant returns to his own town. Lanterns flicker along the streets, casting long shadows against the timbered walls. He moves steadily through the dim light, his presence both ordinary and remarkable in its constancy. Villagers nod in greeting, some stopping to ask questions they know he cannot answer, only to receive a polite gesture in return. The rhythm of life continues around him, but the imprint of his silence lingers, shaping interactions and perceptions with gentle authority. Inside his modest home, the merchant sets his goods carefully, checks his ledgers, and tends to the small comforts of daily life. Though he never speaks, his world is rich with observation, memory, and unspoken understanding. In his quiet diligence, you see a life that communicates without words, relying on patience, subtlety, and resilience. And yet, even as night settles over the town, a quiet question remains. How did a man who never spoke navigate a world built on sound and language? What secrets lie in the discipline of his silence? And how did it shape both him and those around him, in ways too subtle to measure? The morning comes quietly over the town, and you follow the silent merchant as he resumes his daily rhythm. The streets are narrow, the air carries the familiar scents of smoke, damp earth, and animals, and the marketplace hums with the muted symphony of labor, the scraping of cartwheels, the clatter of baskets, the low murmur of voices. Yet the merchant moves differently through it all, attuned not to sound but to subtle cues, small movements, and the patterns that dictate human behavior. In this section, you observe how his silence, far from being a limitation, shapes interactions and teaches lessons in patience, perception, and the understated power of presence. At his stall, a buyer approaches, a woman with a child on her hip. She gestures toward a small bundle of cloth, expecting a reply that never comes. The merchant tilts his head slightly, points to the fabric, and lifts 2 fingers, then opens his palm. The transaction unfolds smoothly. Coins exchanged, fabric handed over. The child watches the process with wide-eyed fascination. The act is ordinary, yet extraordinary in its quiet choreography. The rhythm of negotiation, normally accompanied by speech, is here entirely visual, intuitive, and precise. You notice how other merchants react to him. Some watch with quiet admiration, others with skepticism. They have learned that rushing or raising voices with him achieves nothing. Only careful observation and deliberate gestures are effective. In many ways, his silence exerts a subtle authority. It imposes patience, attentiveness, and respect upon everyone who interacts with him. There is no confrontation, no performance, only the steady expectation that the world will adjust to accommodate him, and it often does. Beyond the marketplace, you follow him along the narrow streets toward the river dock. Here, the work is physical, demanding, and exacting. He loads baskets of grain, stacks barrels of salted fish, and balances small crates of cloth with a meticulous care born of decades of practice. Each motion is deliberate, each placement precise. There is no verbal instruction, yet those who assist him understand perfectly. They have learned the language of his movements, the patterns of his hands, and the silent signals that orchestrate every task. The river is calm, reflecting the pale blue of morning and the soft green of the hills. As the merchant pushes his small boat into the current, you observe his patience and attention to detail. He navigates slowly, testing the flow with a pole, feeling each eddy, avoiding snags and rocks hidden beneath the surface. Every choice is deliberate. Every movement anticipates challenges before they appear. Other boatmen, accustomed to shouting orders or relying on quick speech, watch him with curiosity. He does not need to speak. The river, like the marketplace, responds to his careful observation. Along the way you notice his attention to the smallest details, the tilt of a leaf in the wind, the angle of sunlight reflecting off water, the subtle gestures of passers-by on the riverbank. Each observation informs his next step, allowing him to move with a quiet efficiency. This attentiveness is not born of fear, but of experience. He has learned to see patterns where others see only noise. His silence, far from isolating him, connects him more deeply to the world around him, teaching a subtle lesson in focus and mindfulness. When he reaches a neighboring village, the scene repeats itself. Buyers approach, trades are made, goods are exchanged, all without a single spoken word. You notice the respect in the gestures, the careful attention of those he meets, and the gentle authority his presence conveys. Even those unfamiliar with him quickly adapt to the rhythm of interaction he dictates. It is not domination, nor is it charm. It is the quiet power of consistency, patience, and unwavering attention. By evening, the merchant returns home, the river reflecting the fading light of the sky. He steps from the boat, carries his goods along familiar streets, and is greeted by townspeople with nods, quiet gestures, and small acknowledgements. No one questions his silence. Instead, they have learned to communicate differently, to observe more closely, and to respect the unspoken rhythm he brings to their daily lives. In a world dominated by noise and speech, his quiet presence reshapes understanding through example alone. As night falls, the town grows still. Lanterns flicker against timbered walls, the smell of smoke and cooking fills the air, and the streets empty, except for those attending to evening chores. The merchant closes his shop, arranges his ledgers, and rests. You realize that his silence is not absence, but deliberate attention, a language all its own. It teaches endurance, patience, and the subtle art of influence without words. And yet, even as he sleeps, a question lingers quietly. How did this man's choice, or perhaps his circumstance, to remain silent shape not only his life but the lives of everyone who knew him? How many subtle lessons ripple through history unnoticed, carried by those who live quietly yet profoundly? Night falls gently over the town, and you follow the silent merchant as he concludes his day, though his work never truly ends. The lessons of his silence are subtle, woven into the daily lives of the villagers, shaping their perceptions, behaviors, and even their relationships. In this final section you witness the long-term impact of a life lived quietly, observing how one man's choice, or fate, to remain silent leaves an enduring imprint on an entire community. The morning light returns, pale and steady, illuminating streets that have grown accustomed to his presence. Farmers move along familiar paths, carrying baskets of produce and tending animals, but they now do so with a heightened awareness of their actions. They pause, even briefly, to observe the rhythm and deliberation of the silent merchant, noting the careful way he balances his goods, arranges his stall, and communicates without speech. His example, though unobtrusive, has instilled patience and mindfulness. In the marketplace, the merchant continues his silent interactions. Trades proceed smoothly, and you notice that those who come into contact with him begin to emulate aspects of his careful attention. Children watch intently as he organizes goods, mimicking his gestures with small sticks and bundles of cloth. Adults pause in their own routines, learning to anticipate needs and act with precision rather than haste. Even those who initially doubted him now follow his unspoken lead, recognizing that communication and understanding do not always require words. The merchant's influence extends beyond trade. In homes, families recount his methods to younger generations, emphasizing attentiveness, patience, and the importance of observing the world closely. His life becomes a quiet teaching, a practical demonstration of resilience and focus. People begin to recognize that success, understanding, and respect can emerge not from forceful speech or authority, but from consistency, presence, and silent guidance. Even travelers and outsiders who visit the town learn from him. They notice the subtle ways interactions unfold, the careful exchange of goods, and the gentle, commanding presence he embodies. Many carry these lessons back to their own villages, describing the merchant not as a curiosity, but as an example of quiet mastery over one's environment and relationships. In this way, his influence spreads far beyond the cobblestone streets and narrow alleys of his hometown. As you follow him along the river at dusk, you observe the ritual of his day's end. He arranges his wares carefully, checks his ledgers, and tends to his small boat. Each movement is deliberate, measured, and precise. There is no need for words. Everything he does communicates discipline, skill, and awareness. In the soft twilight, the river reflects his figure, steady and composed, carrying the quiet lesson downstream like the slow current itself. The townspeople, having observed him for years, have internalized his example. They understand that power can be quiet, influence subtle, and learning gradual. The merchant never sought fame, nor did he attempt to shape opinion with speeches or sermons. Yet through patient demonstration, he has transformed the ways people interact with one another, how they negotiate, work, and observe the world around them. His silence has become a language that teaches far more than words often can. And still, you realize, the story is not complete. For while the merchant's life shows the profound impact of quiet diligence, it also raises a lingering question about human perception and the unnoticed forces that shape society. How many individuals, like him, pass through history without fanfare, yet leave subtle yet enduring impressions on communities, guiding behavior, shaping understanding, and teaching lessons through example alone. As you step away from the town, leaving behind the gentle rhythm of his life, the thought lingers. Influence is not always loud, wisdom not always spoken, and endurance not always recognized. Sometimes the quietest lives leave the deepest marks, rippling outward in ways unseen yet profoundly felt. You arrive in a bustling medieval town, its streets lined with timber-framed houses, smoke curling from chimneys, and the faint scent of baked bread drifting from market stalls. The town thrives quietly, nourished by trade, agriculture, and the slow rhythm of seasonal life. But in this story, you will witness a single event that disrupted the ordinary flow of daily existence. A feast held in honor of a visiting noble that transformed from celebration into a chilling reminder of nature's unexpected power. The feast is planned meticulously. Villagers, servants, and local artisans labor for days to prepare. Tables are covered with linen cloths, wooden platters stacked with roasted meats, breads, cheeses, and fruits. Barrels of ale and casks of wine are rolled into the hall. Candles are arranged carefully to cast a warm, inviting glow across the long dining room. You can feel the anticipation in the air, mingling with the faint tang of smoke and the earthy scent of fresh straw spread across the hall floor to accommodate the gathering. As the noble approaches the town, a small procession forms to greet him. Children line the streets, their hands clasped, faces bright with curiosity. Adults bow politely or offer small gestures of respect. The noble is a tall man, dressed in fine robes embroidered with the insignia of his family. His entourage carries banners and lanterns, announcing their presence and status. You follow the procession, noting the mixture of awe, anxiety, and careful planning that the event inspires in everyone involved. Inside the hall, the preparations reach their peak. The head cook tastes sauces, adjusts seasonings, and supervises the careful arrangement of meats and breads. The servants move with silent coordination, ensuring every dish is in place before the noble and his retinue arrive. The townspeople gather along the edges of the hall, their attention split between the display of abundance and the hope that all will proceed without mishap. This feast, while ordinary in concept, carries extraordinary importance. It is a chance for the town to demonstrate loyalty, hospitality, and skill, and for the noble to observe and judge their worthiness. The first signs of unease appear subtly. Outside, the wind begins to shift, carrying a chill that contrasts sharply with the warmth of the hall. Windows rattle faintly in their frames. The noble, seated at the head of the table, notices the subtle tension but attributes it to pre-feast excitement. Servants huddle briefly, exchanging glances, sensing a change in the weather that may soon become significant. As the feast begins, dishes are served, and conversations flow. The aroma of roasted meat, spiced bread, and simmering sauces fills the hall. Laughter mingles with the soft clatter of plates and cups. For a time, it seems as though nothing could disturb the carefully arranged evening. Yet outside, the air grows colder, the wind rises, rattling doors and shutters. Small flakes begin to fall against the darkened windows. No one at first notices, absorbed in the warmth and festivities inside. The first real warning comes when the cook steps to the door, peering out at the flakes settling on the ground. They are small, almost delicate, yet unmistakably snow. The servants exchange glances, murmuring quietly among themselves. The townspeople, unfamiliar with such sudden cold in this season, begin to grow uneasy. The noble, still seated, notes the chill but continues eating, unaware that the evening may take a dramatic turn. You watch as the snowfall intensifies. Within minutes, the small flakes multiply, covering the streets, rooftops, and market stalls. The temperature drops sharply. Candles flicker in the hall as the cold seeps through walls and windows. Guests murmur, some pressing cloaks tighter around themselves. The noble rises, curious, and peers through a window, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. The feast, meticulously prepared, faces a silent adversary, the sudden, unanticipated power of nature. Outside, the town struggles to adapt. Villagers hurry to secure doors, close shutters, and gather livestock. The snowfall is relentless, accumulating quickly. Horses paw at the ground, anxious and confused. Streets that moments ago carried laughter and footsteps now hold a growing layer of white, muffling sound and movement. You follow the scene, noting how ordinary lives are instantly reshaped by an extraordinary event that requires no human malice, no political intrigue, and no dramatic announcement. Nature itself asserts its presence with quiet authority. Back inside the hall, the feast continues, though tension rises. Servants rush to ensure food does not spoil or chill. Drinks are replenished, and fires in the hearth are stoked higher. The noble, though slightly alarmed, observes the calm coordination, appreciating the town's composure in the face of an unforeseen problem. You notice the subtle pride in the eyes of villagers who manage the crisis quietly, demonstrating skill and resilience that speak louder than any words of greeting or ceremony. And yet, despite their best efforts, the snowfall grows heavier. Roads leading out of the town become impassable. Travelers who might have returned to their villages are stranded. The feast, intended as a display of order and prosperity, becomes a lesson in humility and preparedness. You realize that even in a carefully planned world, chance and nature hold sway. Human labor, skill, and ceremony are powerful, but they coexist with forces that demand attention, respect, and adaptation. As night deepens, the feast continues in a transformed way. Candles burn brighter, fires roar higher, and conversations shift from celebration to reflection. Guests, servants, and villagers alike speak in hushed tones about the sudden change, marveling at both the beauty and the danger of the snow that blankets the town. In this quiet adjustment, you see a subtle truth of medieval life that resilience, observation, and patience often matter more than ceremony or spectacle. And yet, as the last course is served, and the noble considers retiring for the night, a thought lingers. How will this night be remembered? Will it be a tale of triumph over nature, of careful preparation, or simply a quiet reminder of the unpredictability that governs every ordinary day? Dawn rises over the snow-blanketed town, soft light reflecting off rooftops, cobblestones, and the frozen river. The feast of the previous night has passed, but its memory lingers in every home, every street, and every quiet corner of the town. You follow the townspeople as they move carefully through the new landscape, noticing how a single unexpected event has rippled into daily life, shaping perception, behavior, and the way ordinary people confront the whims of nature. The first villagers to rise are those responsible for the town's livestock. Horses, cattle, and sheep are restless under the weight of accumulated snow, and caretakers move swiftly, yet with care. You notice the deliberate rhythm of their actions, breaking through crusted snow, leading animals to sheltered areas, checking feed and water. Each motion is guided by experience and observation, a quiet rehearsal repeated countless times through the centuries, yet now infused with urgency. The snow, sudden and relentless, has turned ordinary routines into tests of attentiveness and endurance. Within homes, families gather near hearths, fires crackle and sputter, casting warm light across frozen windows. Breakfast is simple: bread, cheese, and warmed ale or broth. Conversations reflect a mixture of awe and concern. Children speak in hushed voices about the snow, eyes wide with wonder. Adults reflect on the preparation, or lack thereof, for such a sudden event, quietly comparing notes on what worked and what failed. You sense that the feast, intended to demonstrate careful planning and hospitality, has also revealed limits of foresight and the necessity of adaptability. The noble who hosted the feast ventures outside briefly, accompanied by his entourage. He walks slowly, boots crunching in the snow, observing the town with careful scrutiny. Unlike the night before, when warmth and ceremony masked vulnerability, today the cold reveals fragility. Gates creak under ice, rooftops sag with weight, and the river, once placid, now flows with hidden currents beneath the thin layer of frozen surface. The noble nods approvingly at the villagers' careful attention to these details. Their resilience is visible, quiet, and measured, a reflection of experience more than training or ceremony. At the marketplace, remnants of the feast linger. Leftover food, carefully stored, must be protected from frost. Merchants navigate icy streets, carrying goods with deliberate care. You notice subtle changes in the rhythm of trade. Exchanges are slower, movements more precise, and gestures more intentional. Even in the mundane act of commerce, the snowfall has instilled a heightened sense of attention, an unspoken acknowledgement that conditions beyond human control demand patience and adaptability. Some villagers gather in small groups, discussing the lessons of the night. They recall how they managed unexpected cold, what improvisations worked, and which strategies failed. The priest joins them, offering quiet reflection. He emphasizes humility before nature and patience in times of uncertainty. The conversation does not revolve around blame or fear, but understanding, adaptation, and anticipation of future events. The snowfall, sudden and transformative, becomes both teacher and mirror, revealing resilience as much as vulnerability. By midday, the snow begins to thin slightly, yet its impact remains. Roads remain slick, fields are blanketed, and travel beyond the town is difficult. The noble, recognizing both risk and opportunity, meets with local leaders to discuss aid for those in more precarious circumstances. Supplies are organized, paths cleared, and schedules adjusted. You notice how a single environmental event, unexpected, unplanned, alters social and economic patterns, creating temporary hierarchies, responsibilities, and dependencies that would otherwise remain dormant. Throughout the town, small moments reveal human ingenuity. A child discovers that melting snow on a flat stone produces enough water for a small garden patch. A craftsman uses the frozen river to slide logs with greater efficiency than usual. Neighbors assist each other quietly, moving goods and clearing pathways without fanfare. Even as the feast becomes a memory, its lessons manifest in daily routines, revealing how extraordinary circumstances gently, persistently shape ordinary life. As evening approaches, the noble and villagers convene again in the hall where the feast was held. The space, once dominated by food, light, and ceremony, now carries a reflective weight. Conversations are subdued, thoughtful. People share observations, recount details, and compare experiences. The snowstorm has become a shared memory, quietly reshaping community norms, understanding of risk, and appreciation for subtle coordination. And yet, even in this reflection, a lingering thought persists. How do ordinary communities respond when their careful plans collide with nature's unpredictability? How many subtle adaptations, small lessons, and unspoken strategies emerge in the aftermath of events that are, at first, merely inconvenient, but leave lasting influence on behavior, cooperation, and understanding? Night falls once more over the snow-covered town, and you follow the villagers as they integrate the lessons of the unexpected snowfall into daily life. The feast, once a symbol of careful preparation and hospitality, has transformed in memory into a quiet story of resilience, adaptation, and communal effort. In this final section, you witness how a single event, fleeting yet impactful, leaves enduring impressions on a community and the people who live within it. The town wakes to frost lingering on roofs, streets, and fields. Livestock are calm, fed, and sheltered, a testament to the careful attention of the villagers. Families gather at breakfast, recounting the details of the snowfall, sharing subtle triumphs and minor failures from the night before. Children giggle over small adventures, like sliding down snow-covered paths, while adults quietly admire the ingenuity and patience displayed by neighbors in navigating the harsh conditions. The snowfall, sudden and extraordinary, has reshaped perception without altering the underlying patterns of daily life. The noble, visiting still for a few days after the feast, observes these routines closely. He notices the attentiveness with which the villagers maintain their homes, the careful pacing with which goods are moved, and the subtle collaboration between neighbors. Though the feast itself had been disrupted, the nobility now sees a different demonstration of competence, adaptability, patience, and resilience under pressure. This quiet observation, unaccompanied by grand ceremonies, carries lessons as powerful as any celebration or display of wealth. In the marketplace, merchants continue their work, now mindful of the subtle changes in rhythm that the snowfall enforced. Trade proceeds more carefully, gestures more deliberate, and attention to goods more acute. The event has created a shared understanding that even ordinary routines carry the potential for disruption, and that careful observation, patience, and coordination are invaluable tools in times of uncertainty. Small adjustments in behavior, like checking goods for frost damage or clearing icy paths, become habits, quietly reinforcing a culture of mindfulness. At the river, you observe logs being slid along frozen sections, water carefully melted for gardens, and small adaptations that demonstrate human ingenuity in response to environmental challenges. Each act is unremarkable in isolation, but together they form a mosaic of practical intelligence, quietly shaping the community's capacity for survival and cooperation. Ordinary lives, tempered by extraordinary circumstances, reveal the delicate interplay between human effort and natural forces. The feast itself becomes a story retold in subtle tones. It is no longer about the noble's arrival or the abundance of the tables, but about how people responded when plans met unpredictability. Families recount how they worked together, solved problems, and observed one another's ingenuity. The narrative shifts from celebration to reflection, emphasizing the enduring qualities of patience, resilience, and adaptation that define medieval life far more than spectacle or ceremony ever could. Over time, the snowfall leaves no lasting scars, yet its lessons persist. Villagers incorporate small changes into routine. Stores of food are arranged with care for unexpected cold, paths are monitored for ice, and communication between neighbors becomes more attentive and precise. In quiet, unspoken ways, the town grows stronger, more observant, and better prepared for the unforeseen challenges that nature invariably provides. The feast, disrupted by frost, becomes a quiet legend, not of triumph over a visiting noble, but of triumph over circumstance itself. And so, as you leave the town behind, lanterns flickering in windows and smoke curling from chimneys, a thought lingers. How often do ordinary events, disrupted by forces beyond control, leave subtle yet enduring imprints on communities? How many lessons of patience, observation, and resilience ripple quietly through history, unnoticed by chroniclers, but deeply felt by those who lived them? You find yourself approaching the coastal town of Dunwich, a settlement that once thrived with fishermen, merchants, and modest craft workshops, tucked along the edge of cliffs overlooking the North Sea. The town is quiet now, winds carrying the briny tang of the ocean, and the distant cries of gulls. In this story, you will witness a peculiar chapter in medieval history, a siege that unfolded not with thunderous catapults or massed armies, but through silence, strategy, and slow attrition. A siege so unusual that it tested patience, resilience, and the endurance of ordinary townspeople in ways that were both subtle and profound. The siege begins not with a storm of weapons, but with a quiet encirclement. Rival lords, disputing maritime trade routes and fishing rights, send small bands of soldiers to surround Dunwich. They do not attack openly. Instead, they cut off access to the hinterlands, quietly block trade, and patrol nearby roads. The townspeople notice at first as a subtle tightening of the noose, carts delayed on the road, fishermen questioned by strangers, goods arriving later than usual. There is no immediate panic, only a sense of unease, a quiet pressure that settles over daily life like the early morning fog rolling in from the sea. You follow the townspeople as they adjust. Markets open on time, but merchants carry smaller inventories, conscious of the risks of overextending themselves. Households ration food and supplies, drawing on stored grains and salted fish. Children play cautiously, their laughter quieter, their games closer to home. Farmers adjust routines, tending only to essential crops and livestock while keeping watch for any movement from the encircling soldiers. In these subtle adaptations, you witness a community learning to navigate constraint, the slow creep of danger, and the quiet stress of isolation. The town leaders gather in the hall, overlooking the cliffs. The mayor and council debate responses to the encirclement, weighing risks of confrontation against the potential consequences of waiting. Decisions are slow and deliberate. Messages are sent via discreet riders along narrow paths, carrying updates to neighboring allies. The siege is silent but relentless, a test of endurance more than brute force. You notice that the tension lies not in battle, but in the sustained pressure, scarcity, uncertainty, and the psychological weight of being watched, controlled, and limited, without the chaos of direct conflict. Inhabitants adapt in ingenious ways. Fishermen take boats to hidden coves, bringing back fish to supplement rations. Families share supplies, trade knowledge of hidden wells, and develop informal networks of support. Daily life continues, yet under a shadow. You follow one woman as she tends to her garden behind a high wall, checking water barrels and reinforcing fences, aware that the siege is as much a contest of patience as any skirmish with swords. Each person's careful attention, though ordinary in action, contributes to the collective resilience of the town. The encroaching soldiers, in turn, adjust to the townspeople's quiet strategies. They patrol the same routes repeatedly, attempt to intercept supplies, and observe routines. Yet even as they press, they cannot force the town into open confrontation. The siege's power lies in monotony, observation, and subtle restriction, a slow, almost imperceptible form of pressure that tests human resolve over days and weeks. In the evenings, you walk along the cliffs with the mayor, observing the waves crashing far below. The wind is biting, carrying salt and mist, and the sound of the ocean is constant. The mayor speaks quietly of strategy, emphasizing the importance of patience, observation, and endurance. A siege is not always fire and steel, he says. Sometimes it is silence, scarcity, and waiting. It is a test of ordinary lives, their rhythm and their capacity to endure. You feel the weight of his words, understanding that history often turns on quiet endurance rather than dramatic heroics. As the first week of the siege passes, subtle questions begin to take root in the minds of townspeople. How long can they endure this slow attrition? Will the encircling forces eventually grow impatient, or will the town's resilience outlast their efforts? And what will be remembered, the quiet diligence of daily life under pressure, or the spectacle of armies that never clashed? The townspeople return home at dusk, tending fires and preparing simple meals. Candles flicker in windows, casting long shadows over cobblestones, and the sound of the sea continues its relentless rhythm. You sense that each small action, the careful preparation of food, the discreet sharing of supplies, the silent watch over streets and harbor, is part of a larger story of human resilience. And yet, even as night falls, an unresolved thought lingers. How does a community measure strength when it is tested, not by immediate battle, but by quiet endurance, patience, and the ability to adapt to circumstances beyond their control? How will the townspeople of Dunwich remember this siege when years pass, and the memory of silence outweighs the memory of swords? The second week of the silent siege arrives with a muted rhythm, as if the town itself has absorbed the slow pressure and adjusted its heartbeat accordingly. You walk alongside the townspeople of Dunwich, observing how endurance becomes the most essential skill of all, and how ordinary routines transform into quiet acts of strategy and survival under the watchful eyes of encircling forces. Farmers rise before dawn, their boots crunching over frost-laced cobblestones, and tend to their fields with careful deliberation. Supplies are limited, and rationing is now a practiced habit rather than a precaution. Wheat stores are divided with meticulous precision. Livestock are fed sparingly but consistently, ensuring survival without waste. Each day becomes a subtle negotiation between necessity and conservation, and the townspeople's awareness of scarcity sharpens their attention to detail. Merchants continue to trade, but their methods adapt to the siege's pressure. Small goods are moved quietly, sales are negotiated with caution, and trust becomes a currency as valuable as coin. You follow one merchant as he delivers salted fish to a neighboring household, exchanging only a nod and a discreet hand gesture for payment. Words are unnecessary. The community has learned to rely on observation, timing, and unspoken understanding. Communication, once casual and lively, has become deliberate and precise, a reflection of the siege's psychological weight. Children play in narrow alleys and courtyards, yet their games are subdued. Instead of chasing and shouting, they invent quiet contests: who can balance a wooden hoop the longest, or who can gather the most pebbles from the shore without alerting the soldiers nearby. In these small activities, you see the resilience of youth, how ordinary play continues, but adapts to extraordinary circumstances. Their laughter, though muffled, is an act of defiance against the silent pressure imposed upon them. The mayor and town council convene daily in the hall, overlooking the harbour, discussing resource management, water collection, and observation of the encircling forces. Small signs, the movement of patrols, the timing of supply arrivals, the patterns of tides become vital intelligence. You notice that every discussion, every decision, is grounded not in haste but in careful attention to detail. Here, survival depends on observation and coordination, rather than strength or aggression. Outside the town walls, the encircling soldiers grow restless. Their initial subtlety begins to waver as frustration mounts. Patrols become more frequent. Attempts to intercept supplies increase. Yet even as the pressure intensifies, the townspeople's quiet adaptation holds firm. Hidden paths, discreet exchanges, and vigilant observation allow life to continue with only minor disruption. The siege has evolved into a slow game of perception and endurance, a contest of patience between ordinary people and those who would control them. One evening, you walk with a fisherman along the harbour. He checks the small boats hidden behind reeds, ensuring they are ready to bring in fish despite patrols. He speaks softly about the changes in routine, earlier departures, smaller hauls, and careful avoidance of observation. Every movement is calculated, every action purposeful. The siege, though silent, has transformed his daily work into an exercise in ingenuity, demonstrating how ordinary survival strategies become extraordinary under sustained pressure. As the week continues, subtle tensions rise in the town. Supplies dwindle slowly, tempers flare briefly, and fatigue settles in. Yet alongside these pressures, you notice growing solidarity. Neighbors share food, skills, and information. The silent siege, intended to dominate and control, instead cultivates quiet collaboration. Survival is no longer a solitary endeavor. It is a communal effort, guided by observation, discretion, and endurance. By the end of the second week, the town has begun to understand the true nature of the siege. Victory is measured not in dramatic clashes or heroic feats, but in the sustained ability to endure, adapt, and maintain ordinary life in extraordinary conditions. The encircling forces, despite their numbers, cannot break the subtle cohesion of a community committed to observation, patience, and quiet resilience. And yet, even as the townspeople adjust, a lingering question remains: how long can ordinary life continue under such relentless, silent pressure? Will endurance alone suffice, or will the cumulative weight of scarcity, observation, and uncertainty eventually force a change? And in the memory of those who survive, what will define the story, the siege itself, or the quiet fortitude of those who endured it? Weeks pass, and the silent siege stretches into what feels like an eternity. Yet you observe something remarkable. The town of Dunwich, though confined and watched, continues to live, work, and adapt. This final section reveals how endurance, observation, and subtle collaboration define the outcome of the siege, and how ordinary people, faced with slow, patient pressure, reveal extraordinary resilience. The encircling soldiers, initially confident in their strategy, begin to notice the futility of their quiet domination. Despite cutting off supply routes and maintaining a constant presence near the town, they cannot force the inhabitants into panic or submission. The townspeople move with measured caution, ensuring that essential needs are met while avoiding conflict. You follow one patrol as they survey the town. Roads are cleared, livestock are tended, and households function with a quiet, persistent order that frustrates the intruders. The siege, designed to dominate through attrition, finds its limits against a community united by observation, adaptation, and silent coordination. Inside the town, routines continue with subtle precision. Merchants carefully measure out portions of grain and salt, adjusting trade with neighbors to conserve supplies. Children play quietly, maintaining a semblance of normality, despite the tension outside the walls. Farmers tend fields, check fences, and monitor livestock with methodical care. Each ordinary act is transformed into a small, deliberate assertion of resilience, a refusal to allow circumstances to dictate despair. The town's cohesion, built through shared attention and mutual support, becomes its strongest defense. The mayor and council recognize that endurance is not passive. It requires active management, careful observation, and strategic patience. Every day they evaluate the state of supplies, monitor patrol patterns, and plan small adaptations. Paths are rerouted, hidden caches maintained, and signals developed for emergencies. You notice the extraordinary skill involved in these seemingly mundane tasks. Each decision, though minor in isolation, contributes to the town's survival and to the eventual resolution of the siege. The encircling forces grow restless and eventually begin to withdraw. Frustration mounts as they realize that direct confrontation is unnecessary, yet they have achieved nothing. The town has endured through quiet coordination, observation, and patience. Victory in this unusual siege belongs not to the loud, armed, or aggressive, but to those who adapt, persevere, and maintain ordinary life under extraordinary circumstances. After the siege lifts, Dunwich slowly returns to normal rhythm. Markets bustle once more, fishermen sail farther along the coast, and children resume their more boisterous games. Yet the memory of the silent siege lingers in collective consciousness. Villagers recount the experience not as a tale of dramatic battles, but as a quiet testament to endurance, cooperation, and the subtle art of surviving under pressure. Lessons about careful observation, patience, and the power of community are woven into daily life, shaping future responses to scarcity, threat, and uncertainty. Even years later, those who experience the siege reflect on its strange nature. Unlike stories of fire and blood, this tale emphasizes subtlety, discipline, and observation. Ordinary people, armed with vigilance, prudence, and quiet determination, can withstand forces meant to intimidate or dominate. In the end, history records not a spectacular battle, but the enduring influence of patience, adaptability, and the often overlooked power of daily, coordinated effort. And so, as you leave Dunwich behind, the thought remains: how often in history do quiet endurance and subtle coordination triumph over apparent power? How many communities, through ordinary acts of care, observation, and patience, have shaped outcomes in ways unnoticed by chroniclers, yet profoundly influential for the people who lived them? The Siege of Dunwich is one such story, a testament to the extraordinary impact of ordinary lives under silent pressure.